listening to The Starting Zone, a podcast about World of Warcraft and the people who play it. And now, here are your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to The Starting Zone, the podcast about World of Warcraft, the people who play it. Today is September 16th, and my name is Spencer Downey. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to the podcast. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Jason Lucas. Jason, how are you doing on this fine Monday?
Spencer, good morning. We are recording in the morning, which is difficult for my brain, but I think it's going to be okay.
We'll be good. It's okay.
We got a lot to cover this week because, man, we just had the first week of Raid open up. I don't know if you heard, but there's some news about Delves this week that we got to get into. This week is also our first look at War Within Keystone, so we'll kind of lay out like what that's going to look like. But
yep.
Man, I'll tell you what I started feeling already this week was I don't have enough time to actually keep up on too many characters. Like I have leveled more characters than I can maintain at this point. So that's sort of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I feel you. I actually started leveling a third character this week. That was one of the things I started doing because friend of the show, Devil Lord Josh, was leveling up a character. Was like, hey, do you have any alliance characters you want to level up with my alliance characters so we can queue into normals? And I was like, sure. So I started leveling a mage and got that to 73, I think, before we swapped over to something else and started doing something else. But yes, characters are an interesting thing to be like, there's a lot I want to do on a character in a week. Having the time to do those things on a character in a week is going to be a challenge for a few folks, I think, especially if you're someone who's like, hey, I want to get the maximum amount of delves done so that I can actually have the most chances at rewards. Like, how many chances at rewards are enough chances at rewards? Is everyone comfortable with just doing 2 delves and having 1 chance at a nice reward? Or are people wanting to do the full, was it 12 that you have to do to get the max reward?
It's 8 for the full row.
Right, it's 8.
Yeah, it's one. I think is it 1, 4, and 8 or 2, 4, and 8? It's
2, 4,
it's
and
a
8.
lot.
It's 2, 4,
it's a lot. Yeah. Okay. So it's like the raid boss thing, but you need to do. Yeah, that's pretty much the same structure as a raid boss thing, I guess.
Yeah.
The problem is some of the outdoor events also count for that row, and they give like way lower item levels. So you got to check. You got to mouse over your vault row and make sure if you're trying to get those full 616s. Make sure that you're not taking a theater troupe into account or something, right? Because that's not going to get you the top item level.
Yeah, I mean, it will still get you some loot on that character, which is good. So, I mean, you can choose to be like, hey, I spent 45 minutes playing this character, or an hour playing this character this week, and I will get a vault reward. That is a nice thing for a character that you're not actively engaged on all that much. But yes, there is a general concern for if you level a bunch of characters, it's going to be hard to keep up on all of them at the same time. All right, so before we dive too much into World of Warcraft actual game news, Jason, is there anything you want to mention around these layoffs that took place?
Oh, man, I wish that I didn't have anything that I wanted to mention, but we got news last week that Microsoft was doing yet another round of layoffs and another 650 employees, mostly across Activision Blizzard, or maybe entirely across Activision Blizzard. This is absurd. It was just a couple of months ago they laid off 1,900 plus people. Like they're at 2,500 plus layoffs this year post this acquisition, just basically focused on this division. I mean, Microsoft is one of the most, profitable and moneyed corporations that exists on Earth. And like they knew what they were buying, when it came to the Activision Blizzard acquisition. They sort of argued in federal court that like they weren't going to do stuff like this and that it was going to be fine. And that's why they should be allowed to buy this company. How the deal closed, was it late October or early November last year? It was like right before BlizzCon, the deal actually closed. And, that's not even a full year. And just 2,500 plus jobs just out the window. They said no game cancellations as a result of this round this time. So that's nice, I guess. It sounds like the Rumble team got gutted, which stinks. I love that game. I play it every day. I think it's super fun. It hasn't really found an audience.
It's an interesting thing to hear 650 layoffs, and the bulk of them were from the Rumble team, but it's not going to affect any game releases. That's always such a strange thing to hear. Is you're like, well, it's going to affect the speed at which they can support their product, and that support could be a variety of different levels, whether that's art or content creation or the actual back end team for making sure that people, their user satisfaction team, basically, like all of those, like somewhere in there's getting affected. Like these weren't
Right. Yeah. I mean, you
650
can't,
employees who were just like sitting around. Like these were folks who were doing the job.
Right.
So yeah, it's
Anecdotally, like what we were kind of hearing is about half the Rumble team got about halved, which that's absolutely going to affect the rollout. I mean, like there are reports that the company considers the game to be in live service mode at this point, like out of active development. But
yeah.
I feel like the only way a game like that survives is by having new content continually added, and it really hasn't found much of an audience in about the year that it's been out. It doesn't seem like, so it stinks because I love that game, but like obviously that was one of the ones that seemed to be hit the most. I saw people who work around story and franchise development and on the WoW team at Blizzard reporting having been laid off. It seems like also, I mean, across Activision, it seems like a lot of Call of Duty publishing and stuff got hit. I mean, it's just this is it's outrageous. Hopefully, this is the end of it. I mean, what else can you even say at this point?
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of jobs that they've cut since this acquisition is just staggering, and it's not like they're not making money. So it's pretty gross. And the only that's all I can say at this point is I hope this is the end of it for now. Like
Yeah.
we know that the industry has contracted a lot since there was an explosion in 2020 because people were at home. COVID was just starting at that point around North America, and video games were making a lot of money because people were in their house and they needed something to do, and video games were a great way to do that. And I don't know, I guess they just thought that was going to last forever, and then fortunes changed a bit, and the correction is, well, just get rid of staff. Just keep cutting staff, cut headcount, cut projects, just, double down on what works and just get everybody else out of here. Make it look good for this quarter. That's no way to run, something like a video game development takes a lot of long-term investment. It takes a lot of institutional knowledge. It takes a lot of talent. It takes a lot of experience and know-how, and you can't just like replace it on a whim. And I mean, Microsoft is not the only company that's done something like this in the last couple of years. It's just been a bloodbath across this industry. So
yeah.
I'm just hoping that it stops sooner than later, because it's unbelievable. It's just it seems like every other week it's somebody else cutting another staggering amount of jobs.
Yeah, I agree that this is an industry-wide problem. It is not specifically a Microsoft problem, but it is still sad to see, especially after the commitments that we felt were being made by the company during the acquisition. So I agree with you on that. And let's hop back into World of Warcraft and the game that we enjoy. So this past week, I guess I'll start some of this, and then we'll sort of go back and forth. Okay. So we both raided. I raided yesterday. I still have another raid tonight. So I'm now, for those who haven't listened to the tail end of shows necessarily, I am part of a raid team. I am in a raid team that's a 2-day-a-week, 6-hour-a-week raid team. So 3 hours each night. And we are a cutting edge team. And so this is made up of people. Well, there's probably 7 people from the team that I was with back in Shadowlands, at the tail end of Shadowlands. And the rest have sort of been filled in from different areas and different, people's friends and that sort of thing. And so last night in the 3-hour window we killed 13 bosses. So we did all of normal and then killed 5 of the heroics. And then we still got the 3 heroic bosses left tonight to hopefully clear those up before we move into Mythic Week in the week ahead. And so it was a very successful week. I was very pleased with that. And I'm playing, for those who are curious, I'm playing Boomkin at the moment. I will switch over to Resto if there is a need for the additional healer on a particular fight. The exact terminology that I was given by my raid lead, who I've known for a long time now, was... you will play Resto if the only problem we're having on a fight is that we need more healing to kill it. And I was like, okay, that makes sense.
That's fair. I mean, I think that helps you understand what the expectation is.
Yeah. So as everyone might know, I main Resto. My character's name is Triage. It very much is a Resto druid who's focused on healing. So I started doing flex back in BFA, and it's sort of just become a thing for a while, so I'm flex with this team. I'm sure there's going to be mythic fights or days of absence from healers and whatnot where I end up healing again, but for now it's Boomy, and I've been enjoying Boomy. I will say it's interesting to see the buffs coming in on Tuesday. I think they are very needed for Boomkin to make them actually a competitive class for DPS for this season. However, I do feel like I performed pretty well last night, and that was nice to see. So I'm very excited for Tuesday because those numbers are just going to go up by substantial amounts. Those folks who don't know, Boomies are getting a static across the board damage increase of 8%, and then they're also getting a 16% increase on Star Surge damage, which is our big heavy hitting spell, as well as a 20% increase on Starfall damage. So it's a very large buff to Boomies to try and get them back in line with everyone else and get them competitive, and that's going to be super exciting. So yes, my raid week was great. I will pass it over to Jason to talk about his raid week, and then we can explore into the other stuff.
Yeah, so I don't want to be hyperbolic or anything, but I feel like this is maybe the best intro raid since Nax 80, maybe. I don't know. It's way up there in terms of how the difficulty curve feels. My team, I brought a full 30. We finished up raid for the week last night, 6 hours in at 8 of 8 normal and 4 of 8 heroic, which is that's outrageous for us, and we had an hour to look at bosses 5 and 6 a bit. They felt a little bit out of reach in terms of just our group's overall throughput and stuff, but certainly doable with another round of upgrades and stuff. Typically I'm typically happy at like 7 of 8, 2 of 8 or something after a week. So I was very. I mean, we were at 2 of 8 heroic with normal full clear by the end of Wednesday, which is only 4 hours.
Yeah, Ovenex, who's the 5th boss in there, the egg boss is that is a DPS check boss for sure for folks who are going to be in there. We were chatting last night about what bosses are going to be kind of the wall for teams, and I was like, look, this is going to be a DPS check boss because there's so much movement. So learning the dance is really important. Knowing who's going to go to what egg is really important for that fight, and we'll get into the strategies and boss strategy stuff when we start doing those in future episodes. But I will say that that boss is going to be one that I think a lot of teams hit on heroic even and go, wow, okay, we made it to the last phase and the boss still has 25% life left and we're running out of space. What are we going to do? I think that will start happening to some teams for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a way bigger throughput check. It's the first boss that feels hard on heroic for my group. Like the first 4, I mean, I think we one-shot boss 4. The big bug that zips around.
Rashanon, Rashanon,
yeah, the one that's in the one that's in the Dawnbringer dungeon and then shows up in the raid. I think the fights feel really cool. Like it's nothing we haven't seen before, really. I mean, there's some themes it kind of lays into with the webs and stuff like you might expect, but it's all stuff that I feel like most of it reads pretty well and it's pretty familiar if you've been raiding over the last few years, which you might think sounds like maybe detrimental, but I think it's great to start off the expansion like this. I think players want to get in and kill bosses and get loot,
I agree. I think it's important to have the first tier of an expansion be familiar mechanics for folks. Like it's not to me, the first tier of an expansion is not the tier to do really experimental things because you want to hook people and you want to create a really good loop in that first tier. And then you can do the Empire Strikes Back in the next one, right? Like that's really what it is of like, hey, let's have a good story, have a good experience, have people have an enjoyable time raiding. And then if we're going to mess around with things and get dark and get, weird and twisted, let's do that in season 2. Season 1, let's make this very familiar. So you're right. There's basically no boss mechanics in this raid that are like unique boss mechanics if you've been raiding for the last 4 years. Been raiding for the last 4 years, you're going to have seen every single one of the mechanics or something very similar to it already. The one thing that is new is the waves that spread out from people. The waves, we're talking about Rashnanan, and that is a boss that has poison waves that ripple outwards. And that is a mechanic I had not seen before that has a hard edge on one side and then sort of trails into a wake on the other one. So you know which side the wave's going to go to, and people have to choose to put themselves on the appropriate side of the raid to have the wave not wash over the raid. And I think that is a cool mechanic. I really like that hard edge. It's very readable. It's really clear what's going to happen. And it can still trip people up if they're not paying attention and they run the wrong way. So... and
you get to practice it a bit in Dawnbringer because it's the same graphic in there too. So it's not like if you've been doing the dungeons, it wouldn't be necessarily the first time you ever saw it, even though it's new. I really like. the raid it's kind of just one singular space. There's not, you don't kind of go through these different settings really. Like you go down into the pit to fight the egg boss and stuff, but it all has that kind of Nerubian city vibe, but I don't think that's really too bad. Like this is the end of the story that they're telling about the zone, right? So it kind of makes sense. Like it fits the whole theme of the story. I felt like the pacing was pretty good. Like there's some trash, but you're not spending half an hour between bosses or whatever getting from point A to point B.
Yeah.
So
I that was something I also discussed yesterday with the raid team we were talking to, is this feels like a much smaller raid than it is because it's very vertical. Because the raid is so vertical, and it's not like Nyalotha that was flat and long and you sort of had to run through places. This is one that is stacked. So you basically start out, travel down to the bottom, and then work your way up through levels. And the way you get from platform to platform, working your way up, is on a flight path. That's a fairly accelerated flight path. So really, there's only like one run that's a long run, and that's from that's up to the blood boil or blood whatever it is boss, the one that has the beams that shoot out the side and puts you upstairs and downstairs, and you have to kill the ads.
Yeah, I don't know anything's name yet.
So we'll get the names down. But yes, that's the only run that you have. There's a gauntlet that leads up to them, and then outside of that, it's like you get on flight paths, go to the next thing, which also makes it really easy to get back quickly, which I enjoy as well. If you have a wipe situation and you don't have recovery, you can release, grab the speed potion from the rack on the right hand side. If you did not pay attention to that, there is a rack right when you zone into the dungeon on the right hand side that you can pull a potion off of and drink that makes your movement speed go some ridiculous speed faster. So you can run to the flight point really quickly, hop on the flight point, choose the one that's for the boss that you're doing, and then just you arrive at the boss you're doing quite quickly, and you're able to reset and go again. And it's also a raid you can mount up in, which means you can easily repair all of your stuff, which is great. So I'm happy to see that as well. It's overall, I think this is a great starting tier. I'm really excited to see what it looks like on Mythic and get into some of these bosses on that difficulty. And it's overall fun. We had some good loot drop too. We got one of those rings off of normal, off the queen on the last boss, which was really nice. So
nice.
Yeah, some really nice things happening around this raid, and I'm excited for it. So it's good.
Yeah, I had a great time with it. I really, I think the team had a great time. One thing too that I love, we had people who were pretty dedicated to fishing up sharks, so we got those hearty feasts.
Yep.
And man, a hearty feast just completely changes.
Persisting
talk
through
about
death. Oh my god.
Talk about respecting players' time, right? Like you have this big epic space that you can get around quickly and isn't completely full of trash. I'm not a no trash in raids guy, but like I think there's a limit to where it becomes like a problem unto itself. So like you can get around the space quickly. There's not too much trash where it feels like all you're doing is trash. And they added hearty feasts where everybody eats once at the beginning of the hour, and then you don't have to eat again every time you reset. Like it saves us so much time on prog. It's not even funny. So yeah, I mean, I think all those things lead up to it being a really strong first impression. This is what I wanted out of the first raid. I don't want some massive hill to climb. We didn't get punished by having a 30-player group where it was like, well, these mechanics, even on normal, just don't work with 30 players. Yeah. We didn't run into anything like that, which felt great.
And if anything, it will make some bosses easier, because there are some bosses where being able to spread your team out more is actually very helpful, or you're splitting your team into two different halves, and those two halves then work better. There's two bosses in there.
Just gives you more coverage, right? Yeah. You have more different abilities and stuff. Like last boss, I thought was a cool fight without being too spoilery, complex for the sake of complexity. You know what I mean? Like it has sort of, I think an easy parallel to make is like the Sylvanas fight, right? Because you sort of have that first phase, and then you have this sort of intermission where you're moving on these pathways, and then you have the sort of kill or be killed phase. But it doesn't feel like that at all when you actually play it. You're like watching the boss's health chunk down in phase 1. Phase 2 moves, and there's not like really traps. There's certain things you have to account for. You have to kill these ads and navigate the space. But I mean, this phase 2 Sylvanas was such a mess. It's like I think it's almost like you could say Ansurek feels like a Sylvanas type fight done right, but it's, it's 1 weekend, so I don't want to get too crazy. I might end up hating this fight by the end of it, but like, first impression was really good. I didn't have, as a raid leader, I didn't have to do anything too over the top. Like I think of Denathrius or something, where it's like you need to have these really specific group assignments set up and people need to know that it's their time to do this thing or else then everybody just loses.
Yeah, there's very few one person can wipe the raid mechanics in this raid, which I'm also very pleased about. Even in situations where someone is given a personal responsibility, like the poison wave, for example, you can mess up a wave and recover if people have cooldowns and stuff to do so, or everyone uses their personals or whatever it is. Even on heroic, you can mess up that wave and actually have people recover. It is possible. So I'm glad to see where it's like, yes, there's personal responsibility. Yes, it's punishing. And it might wipe your team, but it's not, Halandris, hey, we gave you a bomb. Oops, you messed it up. The whole raid's gone. Here we go. Start over again. Like, everyone has to be perfect.
I think there's a time and place for mechanics like that, maybe. Like, I don't think that they're bad in a vacuum, especially depending on what type of audience you're designing a fight for. But I do think that the time and place for them is never, like, the first tier of rating in an expansion.
I agree. Well, and I also say the amount of them you put into a raid overall is important, and the amount you put on a boss is important. So having one mechanic like that
the scope of the instance, right?
Yeah, having one mechanic like that on a penultimate boss makes perfect sense to me. That's fine on a heroic or mythic difficulty. I never want to see an ability like that on normal, ever. I never want to see an ability that wipes an entire raid if one person messes up on normal difficulty. I think it's just
it's
not
the bar's too high for execution there. Yeah, I agree.
It's just not the place for it.
Just one other quick thing I want to mention on raid is that a mitigating factor here, if you're maybe in the boat where you're feeling like this is too easy, like this many bosses shouldn't die this fast, remember we have BRD coming in like late October, early November probably, and we're going to have that for 2 months. So we're going to have plenty of stuff to do and stuff to kill and stuff to collect. So I think that makes it even better. Like if teams are done with Prague in this raid a couple weeks early, that's going to be great because then we move straight into 20th anniversary and there's going to be all kinds of stuff that people want to do around that. So, but yeah, I think in a different circumstance, this raid might be considered too easy or something like that. But I think this is exactly what it needed to be. For me as a player, at least, it's exactly what it needed to be right now. I'm thrilled that we're so far through already.
The some of the most enjoyable experiences I've had in Mythic raiding, because this is not something I experienced at all in BFA, but it is something I started to experience inside Shadowlands every now and then, is completing your prog by like 2 months, 2.5 months into a raid tier. If you can finish stuff by like 10 weeks after a raid tier comes out and you move into farm mode, mentally and physically, it is such a nice break to have to just be like, hey, as opposed to raiding 3 nights a week or raiding 2 nights a week, we're raiding 1 or 2 nights a week. And the other night can be whatever you want it to be. Maybe you do things like BRD. Maybe you do things like Time Walking Raid. Maybe you're able to do a bunch of Mythic Plus stuff on that day. And you start to like mentally recover and heal towards the next raid that's going to happen. And if you are in Prague for 4 months or 4.5 months, you do not get enough time off between that raid and the next raid to recuperate from showing up and wiping on a boss regularly. And it burns people out. And it's really not healthy. So I would be thrilled if even on Mythic that Race to World first kicks off tomorrow, right? So to me, it's the case where I'm like, I would not be surprised if this was a 5 to 7 day Race to World first raid. That wouldn't surprise me in the least if it was that fast. And would it bother me? No. Well, the reason why it wouldn't bother me is because I go, great, that means I'm probably going to finish this place in like 10 weeks or 11 weeks. That's great. Because that's the difficulty threshold that I look for me inside of a Mythic raid situation. So that gives me more time to push high 20s inside Keystones if that's what I want to do. It gives me time to actually explore PvP in this expansion if that's something I want to do. Like there's so many more ways you can spend your time in World of Warcraft other than raiding, especially other than wiping to a boss 456 times. Like that's not an enjoyable experience. I know from experience, it's not enjoyable. So yeah, I do feel like they've hit the mark well, especially for a first tier. And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with it a bit later on. Jason, if you could just turn your mic down just a little bit, that'd be perfect.
Yes.
Because we're getting excited, which is perfect. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to chat about is tips and tricks for getting ready for raiding content. Now, people might be saying, well, why didn't you talk about this last week? And I would say, because I didn't know everything. And so I talked about the things I knew about, and now I know more things. Delves, obviously being something that we're going to talk a lot about on this show, because there's a ton of tuning and fixes and changes and rotations and hotfixes and brand things that took place. Controversy too, that happened too. We'll touch on that as well. But before I do touch on delves, I want to touch on the easiest way to get some 610 gear. And 610 gear, you might be like, wow, that's heroic gear. That's crazy. How do I do this? Well, you run you run a battleground, an epic battleground preferably, until you win. And when you win an epic battleground the first time, you should get forged gladiators heraldries from an NPC called Hotharn inside of Dornegal. So you get 9 of these. They're a currency for crafting. And you basically look inside trade chat and you find someone who's spamming willing to craft PvP gear. I'll craft PvP gear for free as long as you have your mats, etc., etc. And that person could be making jewelry. They could be making plate gear, whatever it is. And there'll be competitors' gear that you can make. And this is all 610 eye level, provided you use these tokens. And depending on the gear piece, it uses a different amount of them. Boots and wrists and rings are all 3, which means you can get 3 610s if that's something you're thinking about. And you can get a chest, you can get those things. I'd stay away from tier pieces because you're going to want to catalyze your tier pieces at some point. So I would stay away from that. But in my case, I got myself a ring, which is the competitor's signet, I think is what it ended up being called. And so it's a 610 ring that's crafted with my stats on it, because there's 2 different versions. There's one that is the PvP version that has versatility on it, guaranteed. And there's the one that's the PvP version that lets you pick which 2 stats you want on it. So it's a haste mastery ring that's 610 that I embellished with the embellishment for having you do more damage based off of what gems are in it, as far as that spell school goes. And you can socket rings in this expansion twice. So to socket a PvP piece, it costs 5,000 honor, which is a good amount of honor, but it is also just honor. It's not gold. So you can then go out and do that. So if you're someone who's like, hey, I want to pick up some 610 gear on my character, you can go and do a battleground. If you win, you should get this quest automatically, and it's automatically completed. You go talk to Hotharn, you get yourself your forged gladiators heraldries, you go to a crafting person, you buy up the mats that you need to be able to actually craft the item, which for me for this ring was like 30k, and had them craft a 610 piece that is a ring that I will not replace until like I'm getting the heroic ring off of the last boss of the raid, if my other ring is also good. Otherwise I'll just replace the other one, right? But you can craft, like I said, any piece of gear off of this and get yourself some 610. So that is a big tip for folks. If you're trying to get some really high level gear on a character and you have some disposable income as far as gold goes for buying at the materials, that's an easy way to get a 610. So check that out. Now, delves. Delves will get you 603s, all right? So you can get 603s off the end of a tier 8. Tier 8s are challenging, and they didn't start out challenging in the week, and we'll talk about that later, but if you do yourself a tier 8 delve, you get yourself a 603 at the end of it. You can also get a map, and the map can come from a variety of different places inside the delve. I actually got my map from Zekvir showing up inside of my delve, and then after he beat me up and left in that situation, because he showed up during a pull with other mobs when I was solo by myself inside of something. It was very rude just to intrude like that. He left behind this large like bone fragment on the ground, and when I clicked on it, I got a map off of it, and I was like, oh, okay, well that's cool. So that was another way I got a map, but you can get them out of like just drops throughout the delve. You can get them out of the actual chests at the end of delves. You can get them out in the world from what I've heard from some people, but you use this map and it guarantees that you get a 610 piece of gear off the end of that tier 8 delve. So that way, that's how I got my gloves. I got 610 gloves out of doing a tier 8 delve by myself. Zekvir beat me up. I got the map from the bone. I used the map immediately, finished the delve, and then got a 610 set of gloves on top of the 603 that I got. So delves are a great way to gear up your character. They are challenging. They are supposed to be challenging. And we'll talk about that more later in this, but I did a lot of delves. So I will say that I experienced the full spectrum of I have to leave this delve because I can't complete it. That happened midweek last week to, okay, they're decent again and I'm able to clear them. That happened later in the week. So it's been a roller coaster.
Yeah, and we'll get into it a lot more. But yeah, delves were on the menu for me a lot this week across 3 characters, and I have some more to do still. I did a bunch of M0s too, but I got to say, like, I don't think that was the way to go. Like, it was cool to do them, and there is, like, obviously unique stuff in the dungeons that players want, but the item level is so low. And also, like, after raiding a bit, we had some gear, and I felt like we're just crushing the zeros. Like, I wasn't really learning anything to get ready for Keystone Week even.
Right.
So I was not really, like, hopping in there when people were looking for tanks or whatever for zeros. I just kind of wanted to do delves and mostly solo them, you know? And that started out okay on Tuesday, and then in the middle of the week, it became really hard to solo, and so it was better to do a group, and then groups became awful by the end of the week, so then I went back to solo. You know, I think a thing to keep in mind about delves is, like, this is not like a mini game. It's not Torghast, right? I saw a lot of people in ZTH guild chat start, like, when the tuning was bad, start making all kinds of Torghast comparisons, and I get, like, the emotional response to that. But the thing about Torghast was it was like a mini game that you needed for crafting materials, right? That's all it was. You weren't getting anything else out of there except cosmetics. Delves are supposed to be an equivalent to raiding or keystoning or even PvP in some ways. It is an endgame activity that you are going to invest in if you want to, all season, all expansion, maybe even for years to come if the system works out. And so if you're maxing it out this week, awesome. It's not going to get any better. If you're working your way up, that's fine, because it's only the first week of the season and you're going to have months to max it out and reach the top end of the system, you know? With that in mind, like, I approaching it from a low item level monk and a really low item level druid, I felt like the challenge was high, but the rewards are so good it was worth tackling the challenge. Granted, I'm playing tank, and I feel like tank has some unique advantages to soloing. And also, kind of ironically, groups are going to want tanks, which sort of creates a weird dynamic, maybe some tension there. But it was a roller coaster this week, and we'll get more into the tuning. But that was where a lot of my time went this week. I got my Warriors row finished for 616 vault choice. I got the monks done. I got to do all of today's bountifuls on the druid before reset, but I think I can do that. And then, this is kind of what I alluded to earlier. Like, I didn't have time to even think about doing this on the paladin. I'm not going to be able to, maybe if my evening really settles down, maybe I could get the paladin in and get like a couple done to get a vault choice. But, I sort of had this idea when delves were announced, like, well, this is going to be a great way for me to play alts, because they're characters that I don't want to play in a group setting. Yep. They're characters I don't want to play on a schedule, right? I don't want to add nights, and I don't want to coordinate with other players. Yeah. And I think they're definitely scratching that itch for me. Like, my monk and druid are way farther progressed than I've ever had an alt be, this far into an expansion ever. But, like, my time doesn't, like, scale out like this. There's this week, I'm not going to be able to do this week coming up. I'm not going to be able to do this because it's Keystone Week, and the priority is going to be getting the warrior as much keystones as possible, trying to get gear, trying to just get experience and reps with the dungeons, trying to start working my way through the system. So everything kind of flip flops this week coming up, where now dungeons become the priority. But I gotta say, I'm having fun with the delve system. I like it, and I think I like just seeing, like, down the road the progression path for my alts. I think it's awesome. Like, is my monk going to be decked out anytime soon from this? No, but picking up a 616 a week and a 610 every couple days, like, that's really nice. And in a couple months, if I want to swap into Nerebar Palace, it's going to be gentle, right? I'm not going to be bringing in some super undergeared tank that's going to be getting punched into jelly. I'm going to be ready to raid on the tune. So yeah, I think it's pretty awesome.
So one last thing to mention before we hop into what's going on this week in World of Warcraft, because I know we have a big front end, which you should expect on these shows for early expansion stuff, because we got a lot to talk about, a lot of tips to lay out, a lot of information to impart. My new favorite thing to do while I'm just out in the world on my monk is to elemental overload easy mines and then watch someone swoop in and try and mine from the node and get blown up. because it's just absolutely hilarious.
Wow. And you're in flight form probably too.
Well, no,
right?
I'm on a monk. So that's what I was saying.
Oh, okay, on the monk. All right. I was gonna say, like, you're just taking the trolling to a completely different level now. Like,
no.
You're in bird form, overloading, watching somebody blow up and then flying away with your oar. Yeah. We see your tricks. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because the only thing I can imagine happens is for them, they see the node on their mini map, they come soaring in on their mount at top speed, land at the node, and then realize that the node's about to explode because it's been overloaded, and they just don't have time to get out of it. I have seen people fly in and start mining the little nodes from my overload. I've been like, all right, you've asked for this. You know what's about to happen. This isn't like a weird experience for you. You landed here next to it and started mining the little nodes that I created from my overload. So yeah, you got greedy. I didn't. You died. That's the way it is. I know I can mine 3 of them and get out. You clearly didn't. So yeah, it's one of those situations you brought on yourself.
Okay.
So
hey, it's a learning experience, right? It's a teachable moment. They'll know for next time. Maybe they'll know for next time.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And I'll talk about my Zekvir adventures more when we get down to Delves. But for now, let's hop into what's going on this week in World of Warcraft. All right. Sadly, this week, the World Quest event is over. So if you're someone who hopefully took well advantage of doing all your World Quests and getting all of your bonus experience, you did, because this week is now the Burning Crusade Time Walking event where the Sign of the Twisting Nether buff is up, increasing your Burning Crusade reputation gains from combat and quest by 50%. And characters level 30 and above can access Time Walking versions of 6 of the Burning Crusade dungeons that are Blood Furnace, Botanica, Magister's Terrace, Mana Tombs, Shattered Halls, and Underbog. And this gets you some 554 eye level gear on the Adventurer track, as well as the vendor there is selling some 437 eye level gear. And there's a quest to complete 5 of these to get a normal Nerubar Palace piece of gear, which I almost feel is now too low an eye level, I have to say. But you could get, this is the thing, you could get one of the key trinkets that you might need. You could get that ring off of Queen. There's all sorts of things you can get where it's probably going to be worthwhile running those 5 time walkings to try and get that piece of normal gear because it will be valuable to you. The other thing you can do is head out and do Black Temple. There's a time walking version of that raid for groups of 10 to 30 players, and that drops 597 eye level upgradable gear for max level characters. Also, this is how those folks who've managed to get their Warglaze of Azeroth can earn the achievement, which then unlocks the transmog for Warglaze of Azeroth by defeating Illidan during the time walking event in Black Temple. So be sure you get out there and do your time walking dungeons for the week. They shouldn't take very long to do, and I imagine people will be slamming them on Tuesday to get that piece of normal gear before raid kicks off. So definitely
I think those will be pretty short queues. Yeah, this is good timing. Like, even if you're a heroic raider or whatever, you should do this week. These are going to be fast runs. They're not complicated dungeons. And yeah, that box could be something you really want, and it's going to be on an upgrade track. So even though it might start kind of low item level, you can get it up there into the heroic range at least, right? With some currency. So
yep.
If you do rip like a nice trinket or something, then, item level on that stuff doesn't matter as much as just having the effect turned on. And then you can still, jack up the item level a bit. So I'll be doing this on as many tunes as I possibly can. See my earlier comments about how much time I'm going to have this week to distribute. But like, this is a great reward this early in the season. And you know what? Honestly, if you're like a normal team and maybe you finished up with Nerubar Palace this week and you want to play more, but you don't want to step into heroic, I mean, Black Temple Time Walking is going to be a great source of gear. Based on tuning in like Dragonflight, Time Walking raids are super easy these days. So it should, Black Temple's a huge raid, but it should be completable in like under 2 hours if the tuning is anything like it was in Dragonflight. And it drops the exact same item level gear as normal raids. So if you're a normal team and you need more than just an Nerubar Palace this week, keep that in mind. I think it's a good option.
All right. As far as the actual weekly events go, they've sort of been rotating which one we've been seeing. So this week might be the Call of the World Soul. It might be, this past week was World Quest that we had to get done. There could be snuffling happening. Could be doing dungeons. Could be Awakening the Machine. The important thing is go to Dornogal, go to the quest giver just outside of the inn inside Dornogal and pick up whatever the weekly quest is. Eventually we'll find exactly what rhythm and rotation we're getting into with this sort of stuff. For now, just be sure you're getting there and picking up that quest because that will help you out for the week.
This past week, it was actually complete 2 Nerubian delves.
Yes, that was one of them.
So like they've mixed this up so much over the last or the first like 3 weeks here. I don't know what it's going to be. I feel like the way they've been using it is to introduce a new system or story beat on kind of a weekly basis. And I feel like eventually they're going to run out of that, and then we'll have the choose one thing back that we had
that'd be
the
nice.
first week.
Yeah.
That's the impression I'm getting.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Yeah, look for it's like the blue exclamation point with all the spikes shooting out of it. That's the one that gives you your weekly for your pinnacle cache and your spark fragment and all that. So, yeah, they've been all over the place with that the first couple weeks. So it's hard to, we're a day out from reset. So we don't know what's going to happen. Just look for that icon and then do what it tells you.
We like to have the episode out in time for you all to listen to it while the servers are down. So this gives you that opportunity to find out what's happening. Okay, the big reward though from this is obviously that pinnacle cache, which is just some spark fragments, some gold, potentially some items out of it, the valor stones, your kedge, some harbinger, some carved harbinger crests, the restored coffer key, and then some resonance crystals. And if you're someone who's doing it below max level, you'll get yourself some level of experience as well. And the sort of critical thing to mention here is your first 4 activities that you do, whether it's the cumulative wave scenario, whether it's doing the light bringing thing inside Hollowfall, whether it's just doing whatever the quest is that this person hands out, they'll all give you a restored coffer key, so you get 4 keys a week from that guaranteed. And then it's just about the key fragments from world quests and other activities that could potentially get you more keys throughout that week. And other activities, meaning those world soul events that you can go and do. Those actually, I learned this week, if you go to do one and you have like 10 of those actual world soul things on you, you can just choose to do 10 and it just multiplies all your rewards by 10 from that one instance that you go and do, which means it saves everyone, again, respecting players' time, a ton of time of like, I have like 8 of these, what do I do? Well, you can go and actually use 5 of them at the same time and get a ×5. And essentially just do one of them and get that ×5 out of it, get the additional keys, the key fragments you need to be able to then open more restored coffers inside of your bountiful delves, and then get more world soul things to do more of those events, and the cycle continues. And so yes, you can certainly participate in that. Other events that you can do to get those keys are the theater troupe, the severed threads pact that happens out there. So those are another 2 things you can do that are just easy ways. The theater troupe's the easiest way. If you have an alt every week, just do theater troupe. Get you 1 restored coffer key for sure. And it's something where you can actually have a week where you have to play that alt. You can use up all your keys at the same time, but it's right outside Dornegal. You just fly over. It takes 20 minutes tops, and you can do the theater troupe. The other thing you get is out of those first 2 boxes you open, I think you're guaranteed, is a 600 or a 603 that you're guaranteed out of the first 2 boxes you open?
I don't think it's that high, but they made it a lot better. I think it's
593.
Yeah, it's in the 590s, I think.
Yeah.
But they just jacked it up last week, so it's better than it was the first couple weeks preseason. The cool thing is you have a lot of choices around this stuff. They all sort of have their own different vibe, right? Like you have the timed outdoor event that you have to be there at the top of the hour. You have the scenario that you can queue into and do whenever you want. You have the world quest stuff where you're just kind of outdoors doing objectives or whatever. One thing I would say is like severed threads packs should be at the top of your list on at least 1 character, if not all your characters, because you want to get that big chunk for the severed threads every week, right? So like don't leave, I would say, at least for now while we're working on Renown, don't leave that out of your rotation. But you don't have to do all of these to get your max keys and everything. And yeah, you're only going to get gear rewards out of the first 2. So super flexible for sure. But I wouldn't leave out the threads right now. We got to max out on Renown first, and then you can maybe take that out of the rotation.
Yeah,
I do think at some point, like we move into like when we're very high gear, like all we're really doing is like bountiful delves and then rotating those world soul memories and then getting keys from that to do more and the rest of the stuff kind of falls off. Because if you care about it, then all you really care about is your bountiful delves vault, which then just means you need keys, and you know what I mean. So like you sort of graduate out of all this stuff and then you just do that rotation, but. For now, I would say, theater troops like the easiest thing to do if you can catch the top of the hour, and severed threads, like just don't forget to do that at least once a week on your account.
Yeah. The severed threads, I will say this week I hit the point where I was far enough along that I gained 30% increased speed when gathering That was really nice. Just flying around the zone, and essentially anytime I went to gather any node, I just was 30% faster. It was just super, super cool. So I'm glad to see those bonuses kick in. They're not super helpful in a raid or Mythic Plus kind of environment, but they are neat to have that advantage with. It would be cool to see if the dungeons in Azkahet and that sort of zone were ones that were affected, like had you know how they have profession use inside some of them, where you could walk up and, well, you have engineering high enough, here's a flamethrower. That kind of idea. It would be neat if they had one of, oh, you're, respected enough with this particular Severed Threads pack, here's this thing you can do in this dungeon that's really neat. Maybe it's a shortcut, maybe it's a piece of gear that is sort of like the flamethrower, maybe it's something that buffs your group and it's a buff for a period of time because you're respected enough with that renown. That would be a cool thing to see, I think, added into those dungeons if it was something that is there. It might be. I'm not high enough renown to know, so it's possible. Once I cap out with one of them, maybe I'll find Spindle inside of one of those dungeons and chat with Spindle, and they'll be like, hey, here you go. Here's this secret sauce for this dungeon.
That would be a cool seasonal theme. We got like the Zalatath season coming in for Keystones this season. We know that for sure, but we can only assume that's going to rotate through in seasons 2, 3, and beyond. So maybe something that ties into those NPCs and like your active bonus for the week. That would be really cool, actually, especially because like by season 2, a lot of invested players are going to be done with Renown anyway. So it kind of, the story's going to move on, but our relationships with those characters still exist. So, that could be a cool angle to work for like a seasonal thing.
Yeah, possible. Definitely possible. Okay. Speaking of which, there's also Cooking Impossible happening this week for the PvP Brawl. So Nomi is back and wants you to sort of bring your most dangerous pots and pans out to the Valley of the Four Winds for a new brawl in the kitchen. This is a brawl where it's essentially a PvE VP situation. You are out there defeating yaks and plucking vegetables from a garden to bring back to your cooking pot so that Nomi can finish up their cooking as fast as possible. And the other side, the other team, is trying to stop you from doing so and fill their pot first. And so there's a bit of like blocking and fighting over materials and whatnot that can take place in this dungeon. It's a fun one. I love Valley of the Four Winds. Any chance to revisit it is always great. And I need to gather 10,000 honor because I want to double sock up my ring. So this could be a great way to gain a whole bunch of honor for the week as far as that goes as well. So it's certainly something that could be on your list of things to check out.
Yeah, this is one of the more like customized brawls, like it's not, hey, here's this battleground, but with a twist. This is its own thing. And those are always kind of my favorite brawls. And this one's particularly good because the way you can disrupt the other team and or just kind of focus on these objectives that don't involve fighting is really cool. Yeah, the setting's great. Even though Nomi is a supervillain to some people who maybe didn't get all their cooking recipes in Legion, but this is, I think, one of the better brawls. It's pretty fun. For me, it's just like, I haven't done PvP in a couple expansions now, and especially a week like this, like, man, how would I even fit like a PvP session into my schedule? It's just not realistic,
Yeah, I definitely hear you on that. I think it is going to be something that I think a lot of people struggle to fit in, which is kind of why I'm like, hey, this is like my downtime thing when I've got, a Netflix show on, or I just need to take a break from running Mythic Plus this week because it's burned my brain out and I can't do another Mists of Tyrannosaith to try and get my changeling because it's just been driving me nuts. This would be the opportunity to sort of be like, let's just queue up for a battleground, something silly. This is silly and fun. It happens in a bright and happy place. You're doing a fun, silly thing. This could be a nice little reprieve, if you will, if you're someone who needs something like that. All right, world boss for the week is Shirai, the Atrocity of the Undersea. This is the undead monstrosity up in Hallowfall. So be sure that you're getting out there to get your 603 piece of gear from that. You got your plate, legs, and waist, your mail, chest, and feet, your leather, feet, and legs, your cloth, chest, and waist, and your mastery crit ring. And going forward, I will mention none of those pieces change except for the ring on world bosses. The ring changes every week based off the different world boss, but you always have an opportunity at least one catalyzable tier piece and then one alternate piece for all of these specs. So just keep that in mind as far as the world bosses go. So be sure you're getting that in.
Yeah, definitely a must for pretty much everybody out of the gate. Last week they didn't start in Isle of Dorn. We were talking about that the world boss was probably going to be there. It wasn't. It was in Ringing Deep. So I assume that this week's world boss will be the one in Hallowfall. So it is our first look at this whole rotation and all these bosses and everything. Yeah, I think it's kind of cool what they did, I guess, with the loot. It's basically shared, except you have the ring. It's all the same slots.
Yeah.
I guess it narrows down the amount of stuff that you're shooting for. And I mean, what are the odds that you're going to get all the from 4 different world bosses? What are the odds that you're going to get all the loot they offer in one seasonal rotation on one tune? Anyway,
Oh yeah.
it was impossible before. It might, you might be able to do this if they're all basically the same pieces. So we'll see. I think having the ring that rotates stats around is pretty cool. We just need a withered gem trinket. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
From Legion. I forget what the trinket was called, but Withered Gym had this trinket that was so good, and everybody wanted it every season when all the item level went up and everything. I don't think there's anything like that in this pool, but that's sort of what it reminds me of, like having the rotating ring with different stats.
I will remind you that it's the unstable Arcano crystal.
Oh yeah, that's what it was. That was
that
legendary,
trinket.
man. I mean, it wasn't orange. Its name was purple, but geez, the Arcano crystal.
When people got their Arcano crystal, it was like, well, there's no chance of me catching you on the DPS meter anymore because you RNG'd yourself to victory. Like, it was like literally a very strange situation to have a trinket like that off a world boss. It's similar when they don't do good fixes on time walking situations and people get like a time walking trinket or a time walking ring that's like really broken because of how it's scaled with the item level. It's a similar kind of thing. So I always find that funny, but I always feel like Mythic raid gear should top out everything. So it's strange when you hit those situations like the Arcano crystal. All right, Mythic plus affixes. So we're going to take a little bit longer on this because it's important for people to know. The affixes that are going to be coming out this week are Xal'atath's Bargain for Ascendant, Voidbound, Oblivion, and Devour. So those are all bargains that Xal'atath has done. For Ascendant, we're going to see 10 orbs appear every minute while in combat that must be interrupted, purged, knocked, or crowd controlled. If the orb gets a cast off, enemies get buffed with 20% movement speed and haste per cast, which stacks. If the orbs are interrupted, players get a stacking buff worth 2% movement speed and haste per stack. I know, it's not fair that the enemies get a better buff, but you're in a situation where if you can interrupt these, that's great. We don't know which of these are going to be available this week. It's the start of a new season. We don't even know if it's going to be a tyrannical fortified week. It's one of those situations where we just kind of run into it and we're going to find out really quick. But I want to highlight.
Yeah, we don't know what the split is. Yeah, so we're just going to talk about it. I want to point out just right at the top that this kicks in at +2.
+2. Yeah.
So you cannot do a keystone that does not have Xal'atath's Bargain for the week. And as far as we know, we're going to go through this rotation of these bargain affixes, weekly. So there'll be one up every week and it'll rotate.
Yeah. So the next one we'll talk about is Voidbound, where a Void Emissary spawns while players are in combat and they buff enemies. Any mob that gets buffed takes reduced damage. Killing the Void Emissary gives players a buff that gives them 20% cooldown reduction and 10% crit for 20 seconds. So this is a nice big buff, and this is sort of similar to what we've seen before of, hey, there's this mini boss mob that's part of a pack. Kill the mini boss first, then you get big buff and destroy the rest of the pack. That's kind of the concept that we're getting into. This doesn't prevent like interrupts or stuns or anything like that, so feel free to CC the crap out of that pack if you need to. I'm sure there's going to be people out there who are doing like, they DPS that mob down low and then they pull like 4 other packs and then they kill it and they get this huge buff for crit and cooldown reduction and blow all their cooldowns and blow everything up in 20 seconds. And that'll be a nice thing for people to see. So that's Voidbound if we get it. If we get Oblivion, these are crystals that spawn and move toward an enemy while in combat. If the crystal reaches the targeted enemy, the enemy gets a 10% damage reduction. If the players absorb the crystal, they get a mastery and leech buff. This is a big one for boomies. We like our mastery. It's tasty. So we want to be sure that we're getting in front of these crystals and absorbing these things up. There's going to be the greedy rogue that sprints and runs around and grabs all the crystals. It's going to happen. Accept it. That's going to be a thing. But just keep in mind that, that this is a nice affix for us to deal with. Just be sure the crystals don't reach the boss. I'm sure the tank would gladly step in front of them if they needed to be able to get that mastery and leech buff as well. All right. Devour. Players are periodically affected with a heal absorb while in combat. Healing or dispelling the absorb gives players a 20% and 4%, a 2% and a 4% crit buff. It stacks. So you can get 2%, then you can get 4%. Failing to heal or dispel the absorb will heal enemies for 10% of their hit points. So you want to be sure that you're getting these things off of players so that you can actually, get the buff. You don't want enemies getting healed just because you failed to get through this barrier. This is very healing centric. You're going to see a lot of people using cooldowns and whatnot. This is great for your health potions. Health potions are basically a lay on hands at this point because they're like the baseline, healing potion that you can make. The bronze version is 3.5 million health. So it almost is like an entire hit point pool for a DPS. It's pretty crazy. I think players will certainly be able to take advantage of that in these situations to buff themselves when they want to buff themselves. Me getting this debuff, drinking a healing potion to snap the barrier as I'm hitting all of my cooldowns would be beautiful. So I certainly think that you can see that happen. And that's what you're going to see on level 2 keys and beyond. When we hit level 4 keys...
So this is all the stuff we're going to have to learn. These are the only affixes with mechanics this season. There is no sanguine, there's no bursting, there's no entangling, none of the stuff we've come to know over the last many years, and including the new stuff they added in Dragonflight. It's all gone this season. These are the only affixes with literal interactable mechanics, and they do occur in every Keystone dungeon. There is no rank where these don't occur. So this week is going to be a big learning experience, and each of the next 4 weeks are going to be big learning experiences with the first time we see these on live. My initial impression on these is they seem relatively fair. I don't, we'll see how it feels in practice, but it doesn't seem like it's asking a ton of players to counteract. You have to pay attention to it. But I think of something like, incorporeal or afflicted that seemed like it required way more attention. And also, as I complained about a lot during Dragonflight, sort of painted you into a corner with comps. I can interrupt or crowd control, soft CC an orb. I have plenty of options with that as a warrior, but I don't have hard CC, The healing absorb. I have a self heal on demand I can hit and heal myself for a nice chunk of my health, That's a lot different than afflicted was, where I just couldn't do anything. Self healing counts for Devour. So you can counteract it and help your healer out or whatever, even if you don't have a dispel or a targeted heal. So all that stuff, it seems more fair. It seems like it doesn't favor a particular comps or anything as much as kind of where we came from. And also they sort of spread the buffs around, right? There's a haste week, there's a crit week, there's a mastery week. So, it sort of gives everybody a chance to get their favorite stat as the rotation goes along. Plus, there's a CDR week and everybody likes that. So that was really fun when we had that in Shadowlands, like the CDR buff, the cooldown reduction, I mean. My first impression, they're really swinging at the fences here. This is a brand new formula for what Keystone Dungeons are. But just without having played these and just reading about what the game is asking you to do, what the upside is and what the downside is, they seem reasonably fair. I don't think that, if you fail the mechanic, right, bad stuff is going to happen. And the question, I guess, is going to be, how does it feel? How punishing does it feel? But if you repeatedly failed afflicted or incorporeal, you were in big trouble. It asked a lot of you, and the punishment was really harsh. This seems like it's not asking as much of you, which would mean that maybe a harsher punishment is more fair. But we'll see how it ultimately feels. But this is the main and only kind of mini game you're managing for the week inside the dungeon, unlike what we're used to, where you sort of have this stacking complexity, and you have something that happens in the field, and then something that happens on death, and then maybe you have a seasonal thing on top of that, and that is out the window for this season. I totally agree with that. Okay, level 4 affixes, we're either going to, once you start doing level 4 keystones, you're either going to get Fortified or Tyrannical is going to kick in. Fortified is 30% more health and damage. Tyrannical is 30% more health and 15% damage on bosses only, whereas Fortified's trash only.
Then on 7, when you actually do 7 keys and above, you get Challenger's Peril, where death costs 3 times more as far as the time limit goes on the dungeon. So as opposed to a death costing 5 seconds, it's going to cost 15 seconds per death inside of the dungeon to sort of make that a more challenging experience for folks who are struggling on those keys. At level 10, you get both Tyrannical and Fortified active at the same time. And so this is your max reward for the week. For people who are going, hey, what keystone level do I have to do to make sure I get the biggest, baddest piece of gear out of my vault for the week? You need to do 10s. So this means you're going to be dealing with the level 2 affix, Tyrannical, and Fortified at the same time. And if someone dies, it's 3 times as much of a punishment to the timer for the dungeon. So that is a challenge for sure. For people who push beyond that, which means you're just doing it for the flex, if you will, or for the rating, whatever maybe you're going for achievement. At level 12 for keystones, we get Xalatath's Guile. And that means Xalatath essentially banishes all bargains from the dungeon, and all enemies just have a flat, static 20% increase to their hit points and damage on top of Tyrannical and Fortified. So enjoy that. It is a absolute punishing experience, but this is for those players who are like, hey, I really just want keystones to be the dungeon and to just refine on the dungeon and not deal with this affix thing that rotates and is frustrating. So folks who want to get in and do that, have a game mode for them, set above the limit where you're going to get your max reward for the week, so you don't need to worry about it. And keep in mind, a level 10 keystone is equivalent to a 20 from last season. So if you were like, hey, I was just crushing 20s last season, keep in mind where your gear was at. Keep in mind where your gear's at now. This is going to be a challenge this week, getting up to doing 10s and doing 10s. It is going to be a challenge. So folks,
yeah, for sure,
be prepared for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not expecting to. I mean, granted, season 4 was a bit easier, but I'm not really expecting to jump in and immediately start crushing this. We got a lot to learn. We got to learn the dungeons. We got to learn the level 2 affixes. Whatever the bargain is for the week. They did change this structure midway through Dragonflight. So if you played season 3, season 4, it is the same like difficulty curve in terms of the tuning. But if you haven't played in a while, if you didn't play in Dragonflight, or you played season 1 and 2 in Dragonflight, that was the old 2 to 20 structure that has changed. So if zeros felt harder than maybe you thought they would compared to, say, the way Dragonflight zeros felt the first week of Dragonflight, like, yeah, they probably did, and certainly from Shadowlands, it's a big difference in the overall philosophy, but I think it also just streamlines it more, 0 and then up to 10, it just makes more sense, I think, than having the 20 ranks. And it kind of compresses down like the differences between the ranks a bit more, you have 2, 4, 7, 10. I think it's a lot easier to wrap your brain around. It's changed so many times, and they're going back and forth between, it used to be like 10 was the top, then it was 15, and then it was back to 10, then it was back to 15, then it was back to 10, then it went up all the way up to 20. You know what I mean? They've been kind of oscillating on that for years now, and I think where they landed in Dragonflight, they're probably good to just let that ride for a few years here. I think it feels good. It makes sense. It's easy to sort of internalize like what you're shooting for and everything. Like the numbers just feel logical. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. I'm not thrilled about having Fort and Tyrannical active. My goal for the season is going to be to clear all 10s, get all my teleports, get Keystone Hero, and max out every week. And granted, a lot of times what made Keystone's hard was that weekly rotating combo, and you'd have those bad weeks, and that made everything that much worse. So without that, like, you pretty much know what you're getting into every week. There aren't combos per se, because there's really just one affix you have to counterplay. So I don't know. I'm a little bit trepidatious. Like, going into a new Keystone season is always a little gnarly, right? This is going to be harder than anything I've rated for sure. And there's a lot to learn. Tuning might not really be where it needs to be. And if we get level 4 Tyrannical, like, that could really put a damper on week 1 for a lot of people stepping in here, because the bosses, that's a high bar early in the season. Tyrannical bosses, it's so much health, and you have to do the mechanics correctly for so long. So hopefully we're starting with fortified at 4, just so we can sort of start moving our way up. Like if you die on a trash pack, you might fail the timer, but you'll at least be able to complete the dungeon.
Well,
probably,
and
right?
you can kill part of that trash pack and come back and it stays dead.
Yeah, it's gonna die, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not just like pumping damage into something that's gonna drop combat and regenerate. So like, I feel like for the initial outset, I'm kind of crossing my fingers we get fort at 4 because that helps us climb the ladder a little bit more. I feel like.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's exciting to move into a new Mythic Plus season. It's one of my favorite things to do in the game. So I'm hoping that this feels good, and we have like a gentle ramp into working our way up the system. Season 1 is always the hardest, right? Because we're starting from nothing.
Yeah.
We have very low gear. We don't really know how stuff is going to work, and it's a learning process all the way around. And a lot of times they don't have the tuning where ultimately they want it to be or where it's going to end up. So
Yeah.
try to take it for what it is this week, I guess, is that's the way I'm going to do it. If I'm not like maxed out on 10s this week, I am not going to lose sleep over it. We got a long season ahead of us. We got a lot of learning to do. We need a lot of reps. So we'll get there. And this week is going to be all about, hey, what actually happens in these dungeons on Keystone and how do these bargain affixes work?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Other stuff going on this week. Harvest Festival is up and running. It runs until Friday. And so this is your chance to head out to Orgrimmar or Ironforge, and you can also pay tribute to Grom Hellscream in Ashenvale and Uther in Western Plaguelands. And you get yourself some feasts, and you have a good time, and you get yourself a little buff for some experience, if that's something you're looking for the week. So take advantage of Harvest Fest while you can. It's not a super exciting holiday at the moment. It's unfortunate. They need to do more with it. I think we could have a Remembering Varian. We could have a Remembering Illidan. We could have a Remembering whatever we wanted to as far as these things go and start adding stuff in. So I think that would be neat to see some of those things come up and be there. As far as other events going on, Pirates Day is going to be on the 19th. That's this Thursday. This is your chance to get your Highland Drake Pirates Day armor. It's 50,000 gold. That's something you want to buy and get that big chest of booty for the back end of your dragon. You can do that. If it's something where you want to, sail around like a pirate for the day, you can do that. Celebrate the sort of Dread Captain Demeza inside Booty Bay, where you can head down there and have like a little celebration with fireworks and whatnot that go off inside Booty Bay. The Dread Corsair buff will give you a 12-hour pirate costume. That's what I was talking about sailing around as a pirate. And you can defeat O'Leary for the Slightly Chewed Insult book toy that's out there in Booty Bay's Bay. So kill the shark that's out there and get yourself the insult book, because who doesn't like filling out little slots that are empty on your UI for toys and get that toy that you might need. And then last but not least, those who have actually completed the Avasti Admiral achievement can get themselves the Jolly Roger toy as well, if that's something you're wanting to pick up. So yeah, this is happening this week on Thursday.
Love Pirates Day. The armor that they added for your Drake, for the Highland Drake last year, is awesome, and it's well worth the 50K in my opinion. I mean, I love the pirate aesthetic in WoW, so I'm biased, but it is there. We don't know if there's gonna be anything new. We haven't gotten the official blog about it. I suspect not, that there won't be anything new this year, but there might be. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
I will say, like, I think this is the only day all year that you can purchase the Jolly Roger toy, which is the skull and crossbones flag that you wear on your back, and is incredible. And you should have one if you care about such things. So the good news is you can do a Avasti Admiral in like a day if you're extremely patient. The bad news is it's new expansion time, and there's other stuff you want to do other than doing the questing in Booty Bay. What you do basically is you get on the quest where you have to infiltrate the blood sail, and then you're like attacking Booty Bay as a blood sail, but you're like a double agent. You just stay in that scenario and you just kill NPCs that would be otherwise friendly, and then you get blood sail rep, and you just do that until you get the achievement, and then you leave the scenario and you never complete anything else. And then at that point, then you can come in. I think at that point you're hostile to the other NPCs, but another character on your account can go in there and talk to the vendor without getting murdered by the guards. So, I ended up doing it a few years ago. Like I did it all in like one day right before Pirates Day, and like I don't recommend that. But if I really wanted to have the toy. A friend of mine had gotten it like the previous year, and I was like, oh, I need that. And then I kind of forgot to do it for the whole rest of the year. But
Yeah.
it's weird to have a toy you can only buy and now a mount armor you can only buy one day of the year, but that is Thursday, so keep it in mind.
Yep. Okay. We're going to take the Delve ride. That's what we're going to do now. So when Delves came out on Tuesday this past week, I hopped into Delves with Ted, aka Sloot, who's been back playing WoW a bunch, which has been great, and Josh. And we decided, hey, all right, let's just try this out. First and foremost, we'll start on our monks, because we just wanted to have an experience of what it was like before we started using currency and whatnot on our main characters. So we had 3 monks going in. One was Mistweaver, one was Windwalker, and one was Brewmaster. It was perfect. And we decided I was 577 or something on my monk, or somewhere around there. And we decided to just sort of like push through it. And we noticed very quickly into doing this that Bran was doing damage basically as if there were 3 brands in there with us. It wasn't just like one brand was there, it was like 3 of them were there. And it would change as to whose damage inside a meter his damage was contributing towards. So one person would be like at the top of the meter doing hundreds of millions of damage because Bran was like just slamming damage, and it was like their representation of it. And we also noticed that like Bran was basically bringing in the talents and skills from each of our different selections. So if we changed out to like I ran something different than Ted did, than Josh did, we'd get essentially a Bran who occasionally would do stuff from my build or Ted's build or Josh's build. And so there felt like there was something wrong. So I know that Ted reached out on the back end to Kyle to say, hey, there's something up with this. This isn't lining up right. All right. There's something going on with Bran. He's doing a lot of damage. But of course we kept playing because we're not going to like just not do delves, because that's the content we were creating that day. And so we kept going through delves. And so we ended up to the point where we were running 8s on our like 570 something, 580 something geared monks and plowing through 8s. And that was really strange. And so we gathered as much information as we could and submitted that over to the dev side. And basically that sat for that evening until they put out a hotfix where they said we internally, when internally playtesting higher tier delves and Zekvir's lair, we felt Bran was providing too much output. So while Bran should feel useful with these abilities, we don't want him to completely trivialize the mechanics and challenges players face. So what this means is we submitted this feedback and they went, well, let's try a delve. And so they tried one internally and went, wow, okay, yes, this is not doing what it's supposed to do. So we're going to essentially increase the cooldowns on Bran's, interrupt and stun and dispel. And we're going to tweak the health and whatnot of some of the mobs inside the dungeon just a little bit, not like a massive amount, so that Bran's doing less active things and so that the dungeon's a little bit more difficult. So we go into day 2 on Wednesday. And on Wednesday, Ted and I get going before Josh is awake and around because he has a ridiculous schedule. And on Wednesday, Ted and I do, again, some 8s. They're pretty good. They still go pretty smooth. And we decide, all right, this is on our mains now. Let's try Zekvir's dungeon, because we faced Zekvir and beat him the day before inside of one of the 8s that we were doing. And so we went off and did the question mark difficulty of Zekvir. And at that point we did it. We had a third person with us who was part of one of Ted's viewers. And we managed to defeat it after, I think, a few pulls, like 3 or 4 pulls, something like that. And at that point, Ted and I go, well, could we do the question mark difficulty, the second tier difficulty? Let's see how this goes. And so we then spent the next 2 hours, to be clear, it took us 2 hours to defeat the question mark Zekvir. Now I was 590 at the time on my druid, and he was something similar on his paladin. And what we sort of had learned over that period of time is it was basically like a progression raid boss. We had to learn, what interrupts we absolutely had to hit, which ones we could let go, because druid interrupt is a minute. So just keep that in mind, which means that paladin is fortunate he was a paladin because he could have double interrupts, which was good with his shield and whatnot. If we didn't DPS the egg down and kill the egg, and we had to kill the spider, it got substantially more difficult. And the only way that we could actually consistently kill the egg was if Bran helped us. Bran was entirely random in what he was doing. There were attempts where he did basically 0 damage and contributed nothing. And there were attempts where he soloed the egg in about 4 seconds. And you were like, okay, I don't understand the difference in what Brand's doing. So that was really inconsistent. And we managed to defeat it after about 2 hours and recognized, like, okay, we just did something that was supposed to be like 616 eye level or whatever it is. This is still not, there's still something wrong. And so more feedback got submitted, and we got the 912 fixes that came out, where they increased the health and scaling of enemies and delves while grouped with other players. Specifically, they reduced the damage scaling of many enemies and delves while grouped with other players. And the goal of this is to match the difficulty of solo and group play as much as possible in delves. And when looking at the data on group delves, they noticed unexpectedly low combat times coupled with unexpectedly high lethality. In other words, you'd plow through a pack, but if someone got a cast off, everyone died, or whoever it hit would die instantly. And you're like, okay, well, that is a weird experience. They also identified the root cause of this issue and corrected it. This fix increases the health and scaling of enemies per additional player present, but they're also reducing that damage scaling of abilities to compensate for that. And this one didn't hit the mark at all. Along with this, they also introduced a new enemy variant in Delve Tier 8. They put in the mini bosses. These were in for like 4 hours before they pulled these things out, because that also made things too difficult. And they just, overall, it didn't hit the mark as far as what they were doing for delves. This made delves health of mobs and delve scale so astronomically high, people were spending way too long trying to kill off packs. And it made a situation where even in solo play, players were still struggling because the health was just too much for players to be able to do it. Now, not everyone was struggling. There were some classes that were able to get through it. I know Discipline Priests in particular had a substantially easier time because they were considered a healing class when they went in solo. And so it treated the scaling of mobs differently based off of whether you're a healer, a tank, or a DPS. And since Discipline Priests can also DPS so strongly, it meant that they were able to clear through these things a little bit easier. So there was some inconsistency there as depending on different people's experiences for the classes they were playing. We also saw them change the way that sort of deaths worked. So in the 910 hotfix, the combat resurrections are now a shared source starting at 1 charge and recharge once every 10 minutes for as how combat reses work. In the 912 one, they went, hey, you know what? The remaining lives thing is a bit confusing. So as opposed to being the amount of times a player releases takes away a charge and you gain 1 back every time you hit a checkpoint, we're now going to change it to being any death counts as a mark against this. And if you get too many deaths, then you just don't get a bountiful delve at the end of it, bountiful cash at the end of it. And so your delve's dead, basically, for people who were there to try and get that loot, which also made it substantially more difficult because now you could no longer be in a situation where you're bringing a group of players in. If someone dies, you resurrect them, which means it doesn't count towards your lives remaining, whereas now it does. So that became more difficult. Okay, we move into September 13th. This is Friday. This is where things started to get better. They address scaling issues that causing enemies in delves to deal more damage than intended, especially groups with tanks, because tanks in particular were making things scale by like several million more hit points. So developer note on this was, over the last day, we've sought to address the unintended circumstances when certain group compositions made the health of enemies lower than they would be if you went into a delve by yourself. We also tried to move some of the harder affixes from first appearing in tier 9 and above into tier 8. The results were not what we hoped for. We've now brought enemy damage back down closer to our targets, and the most difficult affixes have been moved back up to tier 9, and scaling adjustments have been made to make group and solo play less lethal. This is where delves started to turn around and actually hit a good point again, where people could actually clear through them. So to be clear, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for most of the day, delves were too easy. People were clearing through them a lot. Wednesday evening, they became extremely difficult. Thursday, they were basically impossible for most people. Friday, they started to get better towards the evening on Friday. So there was like a 2-day window overall where delves were like crippled as far as the mechanic goes. We move into the most recent fixes that came out last night. Over the past several days, we've heard player reports of much variance in Brand's performance and contribution in delves, and we've investigated anomalous data along those lines. We recently identified a serious bug that could, under specific circumstances, cause Bran to inherit all the health and damage bonuses meant for enemies in a given difficulty tier. When this bug took effect, the higher the tier of the delve you were running, the stronger Bran would get. We've just deployed a hotfix that would correct this bug. There should now be a consistent baseline of power for Bran, which will increase with your own gear and with his level. Some specs whose gameplay tended towards hanging back and letting Bran take the lead were much more likely to trigger the bug than others. So for those players, we understand that this could make Bran feel significantly weaker than he has been, especially in the highest tier delves. We've also seen feedback that unbugged Bran felt much less impactful than we hoped for. Therefore, along with the bug fix, we've hotfixed Bran to increase his damage and healing by 125% across all tiers. We will continue to monitor feedback and results, and will make further adjustments as needed. Thank you for your cooperation and feedback, and we're getting off the roller coaster. That's basically the hot fixes that have happened over the past week between Tuesday and Monday. And overall, I mean, delves were in a really rough place on Thursday. They really were. Friday, things started to get better. As of yesterday, delves were in a substantially better place. That consistency I talked about with Bran was most likely this bug taking place that we were seeing, where he was like just destroying stuff inside the Zekvir fight. The 125% buff across all tiers will be impactful, period. It's also impactful for players to know that Bran's ability and his power level scales with not just the gear you're wearing, but with his level. A lot of times it's like, oh, well, I have a higher level Bran, he's going to do more damage. That's great. But if you have a high level Bran and a new alt who's like 520 item level going into delves, that will impact the power of Bran. So just keep that in mind, that your item level does affect Bran. So that is an important note to make, which also is an important note to make that this is a system, in my opinion, this is a system that was implemented into the game inside of the vault loot system, which means it's a seasonal thing. This is not a one-time short event. Jason talked about this a bit at the top of the show. This is something that we're going to have to live with for the next 5 to 6 months in the state that it's in, as far as the content that it's in, right? We're not going to get, well, a brand new delve. We might get a delve with the .5 patch. I doubt it. I don't think there'll be any new delves until we move into the next season, in which case we might see new delves. We'll most likely see affixes or twists or things like that to it, with scaling up of the item level of gear, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't want players, I feel like players that are looking at this system as a, hey, this is a 1 week thing, and then we get into Mythic Plus, and then we never have to worry about delves again. If you're someone who is pushing high enough keystones to get above 610 gear, then sure, you might be in that situation. But the system itself, I feel like, was developed for players who might not necessarily want to be active in group content every single week, but still want to be able to progress in a system so they can get their gear every week. And as you get those 610 pieces, or you get those 606 or those 600 or whatever it is pieces you're getting out of your delves, as you sort of progress up from your vault, you'll be gearing your character up more, your item level goes up, your brand gets stronger, your brand's going to be leveling up every week. You can then go and do higher level delves, and it's a progression system that you work through the expansion. So as much as I think systems are developed for every level of player, I do believe that there's going to be a level player much like myself who's doing Mythic content who goes, yeah, delves just aren't really worth it because I'm not going to pick the rewards from that cache anyways at 616 because I'm killing Mythic bosses, so I'm going to pick something from my Mythic caches inside Raid. But there are going to be players out there who are like, yeah, I only play the game 3 to 4 hours a week. I do my 4 delves and get 2 chances at rewards, and my delves are 5s. And so those are guaranteed gear for me that's better than what I'm wearing at my 575 or 580 item level, because World Quests only give me 567s and 571s. So this is a good way for me to get gear and be able to essentially advance my progression up to the point where eventually, like, if you keep getting maps and you're doing tier 8s, by the end of this, you could be a heroic geared character who never stepped foot in Raid. That could absolutely be the case. Just keep that in mind as people who are doing delves. It's a pretty cool system.
Yeah, I mean, the benefits for it are huge for people who like to play solo or maybe have alts they don't want to raid on or whatever. I mean, It's really important to kind of understand where delves are supposed to fit in the overall landscape, right? This is not an expansion feature that is supposed to eat up your time so that you then funnel resources that you earn from it into your typical activities. This is supposed to be one of the typical activities. I think some of the old Blizzard kind of knee-jerk thing kicked in mid last week because Tuesday servers come up, people are in delves Tuesday, Wednesday, crushing them. Groups were tearing through there. Solo, I don't really think they were that bad. I did some solo too, but sort of the word got out that like small groups was the way to go. And rewards normal track raid gear, right? Equivalent. It's actually better than what the first couple normal raid bosses drop at end of run, bountiful. Yep. And then I got a couple treasure maps on a couple characters, and that's equivalent to heroic raid gear, I mean to say. And then you're getting the 616 is actually the highest you can get this week for your vault. And I think Blizzard went, ooh, this is too much power, this is too much gear, they're getting it too quickly, this is bad. And I actually don't think that it was. And they did walk it back. I think they landed in a pretty good spot after all this. I did a solo tier 8 on a pretty low gear character last night before I called it a night, and it felt fine. It was challenging. It was what I bargained for. But it felt fair. So I think it landed okay. But I think they sort of had that knee jerk, like, this is too much. We can't let players have this much power from this. But I feel like the people who were really benefiting from it are people who are not going to be gearing up through delves in the long term anyway. And so I think they're not people who are going to be, they're not people who are progressing the delve system on their character, right? You're already at the top of it. So it needs to be accessible for the people who want it, which are solo players who are probably not going to be, blasting through this the first week it's available. I think where it ended up after they did the group tuning pass, it just felt terrible to do a delve in a group. Stuff was just in combat for several minutes. You're just waiting for Bran to execute it, basically. Yeah. There was no point. You were never going to kill it. You just had to wait for Bran to execute it. That felt really bad. Solo tanking, at first, dude, I was taking so much damage. It was just absurd. They did dial back the amount of magic damage and stuff tanks were taking after a couple days, and that felt a lot better. You got to play around it. You got to be, you have to be on point. Even at relatively high item level for what you can get, if you're soloing a delve and you're trying to get your bountiful reward, you have to play well. You have to do the mechanics. You have to react to what's going on around you. You have to use all the tools that are available to you, which feels good. It feels rewarding. It feels good to use that toolkit, use some technique for how you pull stuff and when and where you position it. And I like all those elements of the gameplay, and I'm glad that they have kind of landed in a spot right now where it feels like a gearing path I can do on the alts that I want to play, and primarily in the system. Yeah. We had a window there where it didn't feel like that, and I don't know. It's a tough call. I can sort of see the argument that you shouldn't be rewarding this kind of gear for this type of activity unless it's way harder than this, but I'm not sure who the audience for that would be at that point, right? Why would you even do this? The more solo players are just going to be brick walled. The higher, group tier players are not going to have any reason to do it. So now you have all this content built, and you're sort of neglecting the audience that really needs it because the audience that doesn't, it has made it trivial. And I think I see where that kind of came in on Blizzard's end, and I'm glad they reversed course on it quickly. I don't have a good argument for why tier 8 delves should be impossible to do solo. There's not that's what they're supposed to be, right? Yeah. If you could do it at low item level, cool, you're a good player. Congratulations, here's your reward. That isn't that the essence of the game itself. That's kind of where I ended up with this, and yeah, I don't know. I'm looking forward to doing more of them and on my alts and really gearing out and collecting set items and Mog and all that through the system.
Yeah, I think overall the failing wasn't necessarily on delve gearing and where delve gear was at. I think Mythic Zeros should have been champion track and should have been something that you essentially could eventually push to 619 if you wanted to. That's where champion track caps out, as opposed to being on veteran track. And there were like 4 steps into veteran track that went up to 606. And I think the larger issue there was, hey, I'm getting champion track gear from doing Bountiful Delves. This is gear that's going to progress and stay with me longer. And it's something that's catalyzable if that's something I want to do. Or I'm at least getting the maps done, which gives me a hero piece, which is catalyzable, which is even better in that situation. So I feel like Mythic Zeros were just so unattractive in comparison to Delves that it just emphasized the problem that was happening with Delves and people getting gear from Delves, and how easy it was to get that gear from Delves. And it also, if Mythic Zero was on champion track, I think you also would have seen the vault reward for Mythic Zeros then also be higher, which means that then it might have been on par with Delves, which I also think would have been an interesting thing to see. So I think it came out as everything kind of compounded and added to that problem and just made a bit more of a mess. So I'm glad to see the fixes that came through. I think Delves are going to be in a good spot. I hope it didn't turn too many people off the system. I do know there's a lot of feedback coming around the community around why weren't things fixed inside testing? Why weren't things fixed in PTR? Why didn't things happen ahead of time? That is an entirely valid conversation to be happening. We're not going to have it right here, right now in our show, but it is an entirely conversation that's worth having, of the team essentially dropping the ball here, things not necessarily going as smooth as they should have. And it did make Delves inaccessible for 2 days. And it did create that same problem of take advantage of these things early, because then you get the benefit, versus essentially not taking advantage and being able to start trying to do Delves until Thursday and just not being able to take advantage of the same thing everyone else sort of got the chance at, right? If you were playing Tuesday, Wednesday, you probably managed to do 8 Delves on tier 8, no problem, and got through it at like 570 something eye level with a full group of players just trouncing through the place, right? And if you're like, oh, that's great, I'm a firefighter and I worked a 48, which means I didn't actually get to play the game on Tuesday, Wednesday, so I logged in Thursday excited to do that and just hit a brick wall. That is an unfortunate circumstance you ended up in, and I'm sorry you ended up in that place, and it's not fun for you, and I get that. So there's the acknowledgement of that. I do know that those sorts of conversations do happen, and I will do a little plug here. Over on Sounds Good Makes Sense, because Josh plugs our show every now and then. He does a YouTube show where he chats about things, and I think this might end up being the topic for the week, is Delves and the development and the issues that took place with Delves as far as that goes. So if you're looking for more delving conversation, you can go over to Devilore on YouTube and check out Sounds Good Makes Sense with his show over there. All right. Notable hotfixes for the week. I do want to dig into these, and there's a lot of them. I'm just going to highlight some important ones here. Things like, evokers who had a level 60 boost used on them didn't know all the core evoker and Drakthir abilities. That's a problem. So that's fixed. That was one of those things that happened. I used a level 60 boost this past week. So I still have one left on my account. And yeah, if I went to use that on Evoker this past week, which I very well could, because I don't have an Evoker at all. I think I have an Evoker who's 50 or something like that, but I never maxed an Evoker out during Dragonflight. I would be very sad if I boosted one and then just didn't have any of their core abilities. So glad that got fixed, along with a lot of other class tweaks and broken things that were taking place with different classes. They fixed things with shamans and warlocks and paladins and mages and evokers and druids and monks and like the whole spectrum of things of what was going on. They left warriors out again. Clearly they're just still the perfect class, so just keep that in mind.
Nothing wrong with them, nothing to fix. So
exactly.
There you go.
Yep. It's
yeah. I mean, it was the changes that we saw, like we talked about last week, the impending like balance changes. They did come in, but then like it was all just bug fixes for the rest of the week, pretty much. Yeah. Just weird behaviors they were cleaning up.
Yeah. As far as dungeons and raids go, item level 350 is now required to queue for War Within Dungeons, which I did feel. And I will say, all of those people out there who are charging exorbitant prices for like item level 400 green PvP gear, I see what you're doing, you big jerks. Anyone who wants to level an alt and wants to just pick up a bunch of BOEs is paying through the nose like 4K per green to be able to actually buy those things up to get their item level up and high enough to do War Within Dungeons. Hopefully time walking resolves a lot of this issue. If you're someone who wants to level, you can level through time walking. If you don't necessarily want to level through the main game, you can level through time walking and then go do world quests, and world quest gear will be nice equivalent gear. And hopefully this helps you avoid some of the predatory things that are happening on the auction house at the moment for folks who are doing that sort of thing. In Norabur Palace, they fixed an issue causing Caustic Skyrazor in the Ascending Reach. It could sometimes fail to Wicked Dive to the platform. They also resolved the issue where some abilities could unintentionally pull creatures in the Pulsing Pit. I experienced this week. It was not fun to just have like a worm out of nowhere rise up out of the pool and no one's near it and nothing went near it. And it was like, yep, it aggroed. Why? Because I cast Starfall. Oh, great. Okay, fun. Silken Court. The fight will now correctly go to the next phase if the boss's health is lowered very quickly. You notice this on LFR, where you could just burn the bosses really fast because there's 2 bosses and they share a health pool. When Binding Webs is broken by immunity, it will now correctly remove it from the ally and it will no longer falsely appear connected. There's an ability where you essentially clothesline a boss, which I think is really, from a wrestling perspective, is pretty amazing. I think it's pretty fantastic. And this is an essential thing to do. And if people bubbled it at the end of it, and they were bubbling maybe because they were going to stand in something they shouldn't, they wouldn't disconnect visually between them and their partner, and they think they were still stuck together. And when you are stuck together with your partner with a piece of web binding you, there's a giant circle around you to know that you have to move out of that circle to be able to break that snare that's on you. And that just doesn't go away. So they fixed that, which is good.
That's like a mega important mechanic on that fight, right? Like if you don't do that right and you don't bonk the boss into the web clothesline, then you probably just die, or a lot of people end up dying. So that, I'm glad they changed that, because, some people just have that sort of instinct, like I have a bad thing on me, let me hit the button and clear it. And like, you do have options with binding web, especially normal, like you only need to hit it once. So like multiple people can have these tethers and you can sort of line it up.
Yeah.
But if it looks like there's a tether and it's not really there, then you're going to have problems on Silken Court for sure.
Yes, especially if the boss charges through a tether that's not there. That would be very bad. Triggering the intermission while a boss is stunned will no longer cause Anu Barash and Takaz to stay during the other's intermission. So one of the abilities that you do with Takaj is you go around the boss, and as you get dispelled, a debuff moves off of you onto the nearest thing, which is the boss, and that then stuns the boss. If you push the intermission while the boss is stunned, it then creates a problem. Same thing with when the charging boss charges, that boss becomes stunned when you actually clothesline it. And so if you pushed into an intermission while that was happening, it also broke the fight. So both those things fixed, which is good. We saw Dawnbreaker fixes come in where the flight speed of Steady Flight has been increased while the Dawnbreaker dungeon. This is because you couldn't keep up with the boss when you were doing the final boss for Rashnanan. During that boss, if you were doing Steady Flight, it was very difficult to keep up with him. The Anubikaj now spawns in a fixed location and no longer patrols, which is really nice because that was frustrating. And the 3 lieutenants that empower Anubikaj now have updated map markers so you can find them. This is really critically important because something that happened this past week is Dawnbreaker, as well as the other 3 top tier dungeons, got moved into the leveling pool. And as cool as that is, because it makes everyone's queue times faster, including those people at max level who are queuing for normal dungeons to try and gear their characters, Dawnbreaker is a maze if you don't know where you're going to go. And the difference between knowing where your group needs to go next and trying to figure that out is like 30 to 40 minutes of time, potentially. So it's really critical that they put in things like, hey, here's the map markers updated for lieutenants, so be sure you're going to go kill these particular things. They also remove map markers for the Merildar holdout points because people were just flying to those because they're map markers, and they updated the Dawnbreaker map marker on the actual map itself. So I think overall Dawnbreaker is not a good leveling dungeon until people figure out the dungeon path. Until they figure out the dungeon path, it's a terrible dungeon. Once they do, it's very fast and good, and it's a great dungeon. But it's really that difference maker is huge.
Yeah, I think it's a fair assessment. This was my kind of concern when I saw that they rolled these in for people who were leveling in alt, that you would level in these. And I ended up in some on the Paladin, I think it was, I was leveling at the time. And yeah, it's, Dawnbreaker's a little complex for something that might be somebody's first look at a dungeon on a character or something. I think these changes are really good, though. Having the patrolling boss was a big problem, and your mind immediately goes to, like, well, how is this going to work on Keystone? Of course, like, that's where my brain always goes with anything about dungeons is, how is this going to affect it on Keystone? I'm very glad that they put the lieutenants, on the map. There's map markers for them and not for the holdout points. Like, I would kind of fly to the holdout points and sort of, beckon everybody down there with me so we could clear a path in there. But it was a little confusing. You get there and it's like, well, what do I do? Where's the thing I need to fight? It doesn't, and you see the boss patrolling around the whole time. So I think it's better like this. Although I did this after these changes came in and I wasn't aware that they were changed, and that was a little confusing. But now I know. Like, now I know that, okay, all the markers are actually changed now for the actual lieutenants you need to kill, not places where maybe you might want to consider landing. And also that the boss just isn't going to move anymore. So, yeah, good changes. Nobody wants a patrolling boss, no matter how thematically cool it is inside the dungeon and the story it's telling. We want the boss to be where we know the boss is.
Yeah, exactly. All right. We also have probably one of, in my opinion, the most noticeable and almost frustrating changes they put in, which was the turning in to middles in Gungaraz now awards 50 Valor Stones as opposed, 5 Valor Stones as opposed to 10. So what I want to highlight here is this is the wax turn in where you find those purple things on the ground, you pick it up, you get a piece of wax, you can turn in 10 of those, you'd get 10 Valor Stones, and you progress along a path towards getting little purchasable cosmetics and toys, which I think were really cool. They also put in additionally after the first 25 turn-ins on each character, each subsequent wax turn-in will award the player with resonance crystals instead. This is just anti-fun. I'm just putting that out there. Like, I know from experience, I really enjoyed targeting those wax puddles and having a good time flying in, seeing the one where you have to bounce on the ooze, and the one where you get launched in the air, have to fly through the orbs, and the one where you have to kill this elite, and this time it spawned 3 mushrooms, and the mushrooms do something different. There's a whole bunch of these really fun little events with it that I would do, and it felt incredibly rewarding because you could go back and get 10 Valor Stones for every 10 wax that you did. And it does take time to get those 10 waxes. Occasionally you get 4 or 5 from something that you were doing, and that felt great. And then, you might go back and at the end of the day, I might have done enough to get like 100 Valor Stones. And that felt cool. Like, good for me. I got 10 turn-ins. I got 100 Valor Stones. That was really fun. And that kind of, was something that eventually I just started accumulating over multiple days, and then I'd go and turn them all in at once. What this does is really mean that you suddenly have this incredible letdown moment. First and foremost, when you walked up and went to turn them in and you got 5 Valor Stones as opposed to 10, right away you're like, oh, this is like half as good as it was. Well, I guess they felt we're getting too many Valor Stones. Maybe we were, I'm not sure. And then later on, suddenly it's like, oh, I'm just getting resonance crystals now. So what, do I just bank all of the wax that I have until next week and then just do all the turn-in at one time and then just ignore the wax thing as long as I have turn-ins, and kind of just this whole system falls off? Like, that's what it sort of became for me. It was a way for a casual player who enjoys gathering and being out in the world to get Valor Stones without having to do a lot of group content to upgrade the World Quest gear and Delve gear that they're wearing on a more consistent basis. And I do think that, in my opinion, I would advocate for them completely removing the after 25 turn-ins thing. I think that is brutal on a more casual player. And I don't think there's anything wrong with 10 Valor Stones. If they want to leave it at 5, they can. But if they remove the 25 thing, I'd be substantially more happy, because overall, I think this is just an anti-fun thing. You took something that felt really rewarding and cool and then just removed the reward from it. And you're like, well, now this just doesn't, it's just not as appealing to me as the other stuff that I was doing. Like, it's unfortunate. I think it's really unfortunate that they made this change.
I get that. To me, I also see the other side of it, which is that this was kind of saving players from themselves in a way. Like, word kind of was getting around that this was the quote unquote correct way to farm Valor Stones. And like, I don't think it was ever intended to be that. And, I mean, how these things kind of get around. Once people start saying it enough, then it becomes kind of pervasive. And now you have people who like, okay, I got a new piece of gear I want to upgrade. Well, I'm just going to go, dive on wax for the next 2 hours or whatever. And I don't think that's really what they want players doing.
Sure,
because it should be like this. I think it's supposed to be this like bonus to whatever else you're doing.
Like, let me in for a sec. So that is this week. Next week, we're going to get a whole bunch of Valor Stones from every single Mythic Plus dungeon you run. And we're going to be getting gear that upgrades our gear from those Mythic Plus dungeons. and you're going to be running more Mythic Plus dungeons and Mythic Plus dungeons. I don't think at any point someone's going to go, you know what's way more worthwhile for me right now? Going out and farming wax for Valor Stones as opposed to running another Mythic Plus dungeon that could give me gear, right? So, like, this is a fix that came in a week before the better way to farm Valor Stones happens. And I feel like this literally is one of those things where they're fixing the correct way before the actual full baked version of the game is out, which it doesn't make sense to me to do that. So I don't know. I think it's unfortunate.
Yeah,
overall.
no, I mean, I get your point for sure. I think it's weird that this rewarded Valor Stones to begin with, because it's like a collection little mini game, right? Like, I mean, yeah, sometimes you got to fight stuff, but it seems like a weird, like, Valor Stones you normally associate with, let's say, a World Quest reward or, you know, an end of activity thing or something. So, like, I don't know. Maybe they didn't belong in here in the first place. I definitely, like, I see your point that, like, this is it's weird to have, like, shut this off this week when, like, players who would be really motivated to take advantage of it are just going to stop soon anyway. I don't know. Maybe they'll continue to adjust it. Like, the wax thing is really more, I think the way the design intent is, like, you get your turn-ins and then you fill up your turn-in bar and then you get your token and then you buy your satchel of whatever you want or your pet or whatever. So, like, the fact that Valor Stones are tied into it is a little bit weird. I don't know. I think this might have been a reaction to just seeing too many players, like, focusing on this as the thing they were supposed to be doing for stones. I don't know. I guess we'll see. If there's any further adjustments to this. It never crossed my mind. I was never like, yeah, I'm gonna go get some wax so I can get Valor stuff. Yeah. But I've sort of been in this spot where I'm very near the holding cap most of the time, and I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, I know everything I'm wearing is going to be getting replaced over the next few weeks, right? Like, what's like the lowest cost stuff I can upgrade just to stay under that holding cap, you know? Because I want to have plenty of them on hand for when I get that first, like, myth track piece or whatever. Yeah. And then I'm ready to go. So I'm sort of in this weird spot where I'm not, like, maxing out on upgrading anything because I want options for the higher track gear. Yeah, so it's weird. It's kind of a weird one. I feel like the whole thing landed in maybe a spot that they didn't anticipate.
I agree. I don't think they anticipated players essentially going, oh, well, this is the best way to farm Valor Stones, so get out there and just grind wax. But I also feel like that is only the best way to farm Valor Stones for that 1 week. And then it was like, or even for that 2 week period, even then, all the people who would do the behavior of, I'm just going to farm wax to get Valor Stones, and that is the best way to get Valor Stones, will be in Mythic Plus, and will live in Mythic Plus and raid for the next chunk of time. And we'll be looking to upgrade that gear, and most likely won't be going, oh yeah, that wax thing, that's the deal. And even then, when they halved it to 5 Valor Stones, capping it at 25 turn-ins per week means, like, eventually I'm just going to start banking wax so that I can then turn in my 25 turn-ins every week because I've done my 25 already. Like, it just seems weird. It's just a bad system now, I think.
Well, yeah, and like what even indicates that you're at 25 turn-ins?
You do a turn-in and you get resonance crystals. That's literally the only clue that you have.
Right. Like, yeah, it's yeah. I think it probably would. It would have been less weird to just the fix be you don't get any Valor Stones at all anymore. Do something else. Like, as terrible as that kind of sounds, like, that sort of makes more sense than, like, all right, listen, we're gonna cut the reward in half and also put this invisible cap on it. I don't know, maybe it's not invisible. Maybe there's something somewhere that tells you how many turn-ins you have remaining. But still, now there are a lot of weird rules around this, and I feel like this is way more involved than it should be for, like,
a fun
you're
little
supposed to
thing
turn the wax into the kobolds, and then they
Yeah.
found these shinies for you, and everybody's happy,
Exactly.
right? Like,
Yeah.
that's the whole.
Yep.
That's what it's supposed to be, and it gets twisted around this upgrade currency. It's kind of funny when you really, like, step back, when you zoom out. It's like, how did we end up here?
Yep. All right. Another hotfix that came in was all healer specializations can now roll need on the Spymaster's Web, which is a critically important trinket after the raid, as well as their Great Vault can also have that particular trinket in it. And for some spells that healers cast, we're not triggering the effect on it. So that's also been something that's been fixed. This is, like, arguably the best caster trinket in the game. So it's important that, everyone has a chance at getting it. So They have resolved that, which is great because it's all resolved before the actual first Great Vault happens, which means someone might get lucky next week. I'm sure someone will, and get themselves a Spy Master's Web out of that Great Vault. Okay.
Yeah, it's really important to have that stuff for correct specs and everything, right?
Yeah.
And maybe this is a good time just for a little PSA. Make sure when you go to open your vault that you're set to the correct loot spec for what you want, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Tanks, for example, like we spent pretty much all of Dragonflight and a good chunk of Shadowlands, like not caring about tanking trinkets because we just took DPS trinkets and that was fine. And I think we're moving into a world where that is less desirable because we have a damage penalty on DPS trinkets now. And also, if you're like me, you're probably hovering around, low 600s item level, and some stuff is really hurting. So you might actually need to run like an absorb trinket or something that has a defensive benefit, which, that's a bit of an alien concept to me. We haven't done that in a long time. So yeah, while we're thinking about trinkets, loot specs, and Great Vault, like just double check before you click that button tomorrow that you're on the spec that you want to be on, because you don't get a do-over on that. And that, oh man, what a bummer that would be for the first vault of the season.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking of public service announcements, I have another one to make. They did a bunch of hotfixes around Warbound until equipped gear this past week, so folks might have been checking their bank or whatnot and been like, hey, I have this trinket from like Burning Crusade. It now says Warbound on it. That's weird. Yeah, you can actually move that around character to character. There is old legacy gear that has now been fixed and ended up on the Warbound until equipped track. The PSA I want to give around this gear is at current, and this is something that will become a bannable offense, so don't do this. At current, players can run the raid multiple times, and every time they kill a boss, they get a chance at a Warbound until equipped piece off the boss. That is currently a thing, and that is something that I'm sure Blizzard will be addressing in an aggressive manner for players who are just spamming the raid over and over again and getting Warbound until equipped raid gear that they're mailing off to alternate characters. This is something the Race to World First guys are even saying, do not do this, you will get banned. All right? When even the guys
if they're telling you not to do it,
right?
you really don't want to do it because they bend the rules like nobody's business.
Exactly.
And so if they're hands off on this one, you know it's not a good idea.
Exactly. So let's just be clear that if you are someone who's like, hey, I ran the raid once, hey, I ran the raid again, and bosses that I already got loot off, if I start getting these Warbound until equip pieces, maybe I should do this a third time? That is starting to eke into danger territory. Stop doing that. That is bad behavior that you will get punished for, and it will really suck. So for those who don't know, once your account gets banned, it gets flagged, and you always have that ban on your account as something that they sort of look at when they're making considerations for things like beta access and things like that. So just keep that in mind. All right, alchemy. They did a hot fix to alchemy here so that meticulous experimentation will no longer allow you to experiment with herbs that have no possible discoveries until all discoveries are found. That was last part of that sentence is the stupid part of the sentence. You can discover everything, and while you're along the way, it won't let you play around with materials you've already discovered stuff for, and there's nothing left to discover with. But as soon as you discovered everything, you can experiment all you want for nothing. Wait, what? Yes.
Well, I mean, nobody said that alchemy made any sense.
True. Yeah, it's true. It's really weird. I basically hit the point where I thought I discovered everything, and I was like, I'll just do one more or whatever. I'll throw some, herb that I have a ton of in there to sort of see what happens. And yeah, I could experiment and just not gain anything. I will say what you can gain,
that's weird,
for folks who do want to do it, is it's a green chance at a skill up at a certain point. So you can like attempt to spend 20 herbs to get a skill up, but I'd rather be crafting a potion I can use than experimenting for nothing. So it's just a strange thing. So just keep that in mind as players who are into the game. Be sure you're reading the text when you click on meticulous experimentation, because the small little font will tell you you've discovered everything that you can discover from this, so that you're not actually, wasting your materials on thinking you're trying to discover something more. So yeah, that's
cool. It's cool that they made it so that you can't, use herbs that won't discover something on the way up, though. That's great, because I'm doing alchemy on an alt. I'm not super invested in it, but I try to remember, once a day to log in and do my experimentation. And, first of all, it's not obvious that like the herbs you use will only discover stuff that uses them in the recipe that you discover. So that's like a layer that you have to understand. And, then the idea that you could potentially be wasting herbs on a discovery you'll never get, like that wasn't clear in the way it was implemented. So, nice change. It's just way more user friendly, at least on the way up. So keep that in mind. I still have a ton of stuff to discover, but it's a little side project on the to number 3. It's my second alt, right? And it's like I'm not really trying to max out the profession very quick, but man, it would really stink to burn up a bunch of 20-hour cooldowns on something that you were never going to get any benefit from.
Exactly. All right, the enchanting fix that came in that I love is they added a shatter recipe to Khazalgar enchanting, allowing you to turn gleaming shards into storm dust. The quality of the gleaming shards limits the quality of the storm dust you get from the shatter, with the quality of the storm dust otherwise determined by a combination of your enchanting skill and uncommon utilitarian specialization. So I haven't looked at the specializations. I didn't realize it was called uncommon utilization. Uncommon utilitarian specialization, but that's a thing. Okay, so this is great because this helps level up. One of the weirdest things with enchanting is trying to level up enchanting, because to a certain point you get skill ups from just disenchanting things. You can also get knowledge points from just disenchanting things. So there's a big motivation to disenchant things, which is why like every green on the auction house costs at least 300 gold, if not more, because everyone's buying greens to disenchant them to level enchanting and have enchanting materials. The shatter also skills up your enchanting. So another great way to skill up enchanting is to go and do like world quest content or dungeon content, get blues, disenchant them into these shards, shatter those shards into dust, and in disenchanting them you get a skill up towards your enchanting, and then in shattering them you get a skill up towards your enchanting. So it actually helps you level up enchanting at the very beginning, which is great. So I think overall it's a great add. I'm very happy to see it. It certainly helps that whole system out. So glad to see that. Thank you for adding that. Okay. Got anything for that? You good?
Well, I was going to say, like, greens have been kind of scarce, right? And
yes,
my enchanting main friends have been, or at least before this change, were kind of lamenting, like, I'm not really getting as many greens in dungeons and stuff as I'm accustomed to. And man, I really wish there was some kind of shatter or something, because I don't have enough dust. I have other stuff, but I don't have enough dust to make it all work. And then, I mean, also, like, as you were talking about, the price pressure on greens because of that like item level gap, all that stuff kind of comes into play. So it kind of weird that this wasn't in here like as part of the whole picture to begin with, but I'm glad they added it early, because this is great for enchanters. Just actually make it so that you can do stuff with your profession, because you can get enough mats to enchant things.
Now I will emphasize there is still a hot fix for enchanting that everyone is waiting on. This is to turn back on the crafting guild quest for enchanting that they turned off in week 1. When the expansion came out, there was a enchanting quest from the crafters guild to do work orders that every other profession class has that crafts things, that was available during early access. And their fix for this was to turn off that quest for the first week, so that players could essentially catch up on their enchanting without feeling like they're falling behind because people who had early access. And the way they caught up was by disenchanting things. You would then catch up on the knowledge you didn't have yet through disenchanting items to a certain point. They have not turned this quest back on since. There is still no quest for players to pick up to do crafting orders for enchanting. This needs to get turned back on for enchanters. Knowledge-wise, it's just punishing. It also is discouraging people from actually doing crafting orders regularly, which is silly. So please turn that back on. Earthen now have a new racial called Quiet Contemplation, where you can take a load off your feet and enjoy your newfound freedom to see the world while recovering your health and mana out of combat. It's cool. It's just out of combat regen. Fun little racial. I dig it. I'm glad that they're emphasizing and leaning into the Earthen are free Earthen, and can, sort of do their own thing and relax and chill. So it's a fun racial. I'm glad to see it.
That's cool. Did this replace anything? I can't remember. Did they lose something? Yeah. I mean, I think like racials have been pretty de-emphasized, and they're mostly more for flavor than anything else. Yeah. So that's cool. I mean, like, I think there are reasons maybe you want to play an Earthen for sure that go beyond maybe just the aesthetic, but I'm not sure that this is one of them, but that's fine. I
Yeah.
think that's exactly the niche where a racial belongs. Like, it's a cool thing. It adds flavor to the character that you're playing, but it doesn't provide some kind of huge advantage over another choice you could make.
Yep. Okay. Balance tuning coming in tomorrow, September 17th. We are getting the big balance tuning first pass before Mythic Raid kicks off. I've already mentioned the balanced druid ones of all ability damage increased by 6%, Star Surge damage increased by 16%, Starfall damage increased by 20%, not in PvP for Starfall damage. Elun's Chosen, Lunar Calling, buffed by 15% up to 80% from 65%. 50% of the bonus remains in PvP. Feral Druids getting a pass on damage as well. Restoration Druids, all healing increased by 8%. Wrath damage increased by 20%. Starfire damage increased by 20%. Star Surge damage increased by 20%. Man, big buffs for the Druids, all right? Druids across the board, except for Guardian, getting themselves some hefty buffs. We also saw Havoc Demon Hunters get some tuning and fixes come in for their class. Evokers, your Disintegrate damage is increased by 10%. Devastation is also getting Eternity Surge damage increased by 10%. We saw Arcane getting themselves some bonus damage reduced on a lot of their abilities. So the Sun Fury Meteorite damage reduced by 15%. We also saw Sun Fury Burden get its Arcane Blast damage and Arcane Barrage damage reduced by 10%. So those Arcane mages might be feeling that a bit more. I was actually watching some of Echo's runs at Queen, the last boss inside the raid, and they were talking about how all the timings for that boss work out perfectly with Arcane Mage and how many mages would be running Arcane, etc. This is clearly them trying to reel some of that in, and at the same time buffing up all ability damage for fire mages by 6% and increasing living bomb damage done by 25% to sort of make fire more viable, get some more things in line. Let's see where people sort of shake out at the end of this as far as being able to play the spec you want to play for the content that you're doing versus following the meta and what that choice is going to be. Mistweaver monks who are in dire need of some healing buffs got themselves 3% more healing, as well as more damage on their Tiger Palm and Rising Sun Kick by 15%. And Windwalkers are Darting Hurricane passive trigger rate has been reduced by 50% and now reduces the global cooldown by 0.25 seconds from 0.5 seconds. So saw ourselves some nerfs there. Holy Paladins got 6% more healing done, as well as some more damage increases to their abilities. Priests on Shadow side get 6% more damage done, which is great. Rogues and Outlaw get some nerfs. Enhancement Shamans get some buffs. Resto Shamans get some damage buffs, not some healing buffs. And Demonology Warlocks are getting a little bit of damage increase across the board, which is good to see, because I know that's a very fun spec and they kind of needed just a little bit more touch. And then Destruction Warlocks are getting a much more significant damage buff as well to sort of bring them a little bit closer. And then Jason, they're actually doing something for Warriors.
Indeed they are, although it's a bit of a mixed bag for the DPS specs. Colossus is getting a little bit of a very tiny nudge in terms of damage output. And Mountain Thane, a couple abilities are just getting some damage increases as well. Nothing outrageous, but still just turn the dial up a little bit. But Arms and Fury are getting baseline nerfs. They're doing a similar thing with Rogue. They're taking some of the power out of like the class baseline, putting some more in either hero talents or sets. So like Rogue is getting some power added to their set bonuses, but you know, the trade-off is you probably don't have your 4 set bonus right now.
Right.
So like you're just getting nerfed on Tuesday, but as you collect your set, you will then see bigger increases. Warrior, they're kind of shifting the power pie around. Baseline Arms and Fury specs getting, a bit of a mixed bag. Well, no, the baseline class abilities are just getting straight up nerfed in those specs, the ones that are getting changed, but more power is being put into the hero talent. I'm not really sure like why necessarily, but I guess it does give them more flexibility perhaps because you could tweak the hero talents a lot more. Right.
Yep.
Everybody's going to have them all the time. And, there's choice nodes and stuff, but it's not as build destroying as like, oh, if this talent gets nerfed to the point where it's no longer preferable, now you got to rebuild your whole tree. I feel like they can adjust the hero talents a lot more and make bigger changes to them. So, yeah, I mean, in my case, Nothing changes for prot, but I'm getting 6% extra damage on Thunder Blast, which is like the good thunderclap that procs from while in Mountain Thane. And Lightning Strikes, which is just free damage that procs, and Ground Current, all that stuff, extra 6% damage on top of what I'm already doing. I'm not going to complain about that. That's perfect for me. I feel like they always come in a little, I don't know, a little light on Prot Warrior damage. It just always sort of feels that way. We haven't been like a big damage spec since, I don't know.
Nyalotha.
What, like BFA? Yeah, everybody was a Nyalotha with Twilight Dev, but I really think of like season 2 BFA probably, where that sort of Avatar Thunderclap thing was so super powerful. That was like the last time Prot Warrior was big damage. I don't think this is enough to make us like a big damage tank, but I'm glad to have it. It's certainly going to make stuff easy. I mean, I've been running Mountain Thane like exclusively. It's super fun. It looks cool. I love the way that it looks. It's the exact like kind of fantasy that I wanted, even though it doesn't fit my character. It's just cool, and it's so streamlined. I don't think about anything. It's just like sometimes a good thunderclap procs, and I gotta prioritize that, right?
Yep.
And that's it. Colossus is interesting, but it involves this sort of mini game around this new ability, and it's not like it's fine, but I'm perfectly happy to just play Thane and enjoy myself. So, yeah, keep turning that dial. That's I'm thrilled.
Yeah. If you're someone who wants to check out your class changes and tuning fixes that are coming in, obviously there's a link in our show notes to all of the things we talk about on the show. So you can check out that post for yourself, and I recommend you do so if that's something you care about and are interested in. All right. We also saw some tuning coming in on the 17th for trinkets. Basically, across the board, they are buffing and nerfing a variety of trinkets. Again, I will just emphasize, check the show notes for the link if you want to be worried about your particular trinkets. I will highlight that the Arikara Sack Brood trinket is getting its primary stat reduced by 5%. That is one of the ones that a lot of people are using. Same thing with the intellect on the Spymaster's Web is being reduced by 5%. So these two trinkets that are major trinkets for people are getting nerfed to sort of help them get back in line with things. Spymaster's Web is still going to be the best in slot trinket. Arikara Sack Brood is still going to be a trinket everyone looks for at a Mythic Plus at a high level. Those are still going to be very good trinkets to use. They're just not going to be overwhelmingly overpowered. So just keep that in mind. So we'll see that that get tweaked a bit, and people will want to check out to see maybe what trinkets are sitting around. Maybe you're one of those people who got like 12 trinkets out of doing your delves for the week, and you're like, what do I do with all these trinkets? Well, hang on to them until next week, and then see if some of this stuff changes a bit and you want to swap out the ones you're using, because that could certainly be helpful. They do say our intent is to do the itemization tuning passes rarely, but usually the first week of a patch or so, and then they're more hands-off on the approach with room for a follow-up a few weeks after the extreme outliers if they still exist, are unaddressed. So they've received feedback about the inconsistency in performance across delve trinkets as a whole, and they're looking to address them in a larger delve-specific itemization sweep in the coming weeks. So we will see another pass of these trinkets, which is why I say hang on to them for now. Just throw them in your bank, let them sit there, and maybe, we'll have another Arcano Crystal or something come flying out of delves. Who knows?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, the advice that you're giving there is what I always do anyway, basically all season long. Any trinket I get, I just leave it, I have like the gear that I wear, and then just every trinket I've come across all season, basically, because you never know, stuff does get adjusted, or sometimes you kind of, maybe like if I have a more defensive trinket, eventually I sort of quote unquote grow out of it, and then I want to swap to a more offensive trinket. So I just hang on to everything just in case, which does get a little hairy, it gets a little confusing. There's a lot of stuff, and I'm not too familiar with all of the trinkets that are on offer yet, but I'm glad that they changed this early, that this is coming in with the vault, the first vault, because it would really stink to, some of these are pretty big, a 25%, change to an absorb or something like that really drastically changes like the usefulness of that trinket, and like I was talking about earlier, I think defensive trinkets are much more valuable now than we've been used to them being lately. Tanks are low gear. We're not familiar with how the fights work yet. We're not getting as big of a benefit from offensive trinkets. So, we have a different landscape here, and so we need to keep that in mind. I'm definitely holding on to everything I get. But I'm glad that like I think it's a good philosophy to like get these changes in before the vault and then to kind of plan not to do too many other big adjustments to these trinkets. I think this is mostly looking at the list. I think this is mostly the dungeon drops. And you know the delves is a whole different story. Delve trinkets seem to be really all over the place, so you know I think that'll be a whole different thing. But I think trying to bring the dungeon trinkets in line and then say, okay, our plan is to kind of leave these like this for the foreseeable. That helps people make good choices, right? Or feel good about the choices that they make when it comes to vault rewards and like maybe dungeons to target for keystone drops, you know, for end of dungeon drops or whatever. You know, it's just good to have the info about like what the team is thinking, what to expect in terms of how these items are going to work for the next little while here.
Yeah, exactly. Warbound Valorstone discount. So you might have noticed that if you go on to your other characters, you're not getting a Valorstone discount for upgrading items that you've already upgraded on your main character above the item level that your alt character might have. That is something they identified as being an issue, that it's not happening, and should be fixed with this week's maintenance on the 17th. So just hang on to your Valor Stones, hold out on upgrading your alt gear. That's what I've been doing. It's why my monk's sitting where it's sitting eye level wise, is because I'm just waiting for this rollover to happen so I can get in there and upgrade everything for nice and inexpensive amount of Valor Stones and be able to essentially save more of those on my alt. Eventually, I might start pushing them higher on my alt and using the spending there than I do on my main, so my main has an easier time upgrading gear and it's easier to maintain Valor Stones on them. Who knows? We will see what we choose to do, but overall, I'm very happy to see this because it's just going to be easier to gear alts up over time. You don't have to farm as many Valor Stones from doing wax, because apparently that's a problem.
Right. Yeah, it's just less wax you have to do on your alts, but yeah, keep this in mind. I mean, we're at the very tail end of this now because it should be fixed, you know, in about 24 hours, yep. We'll say. So, you know, if you're listening to this very shortly before reset or something, and you're like, oh, should I just upgrade this like on an alt? No, don't. Save your stuff for now. It should be fixed, and then next week you should be able to get that discount because. Yeah, the Valor Stones, or what we used to call Flight Stones in Dragonflight, it's a very weird dynamic, and we talked about it a little bit with the the wax thing and the snuffling, but like there is this weird tension between on a main, it's always like for me, I have too much, I spend them all and then I fill it all back up, and so there's this weird tension around like, am I going to be doing stuff that rewards them? Okay, what can I spend them on? Let me just find some kind of sink so that I don't reach the holding cap. And then on alts, it's always like, how do I get enough of these? Like, I would like to do this, but I can't. What's a way to do it? So the warband discount is huge for that, right? And so you want to make sure it's actually working and that you're taking advantage of it, I guess is my thing.
I would like to see the ability to upgrade Warbound until equipped gear without it binding to you. That's what I would like to see. So that on your main character,
that would be cool.
Your sync is to upgrade the raid gear that you get that's Warbound until equipped, or the gear that you get out in the world, or the gear that you get from Mythic Plus, or whatever it is, and send it to your alts. So you're choosing to use currency on your main, who has too much currency, and send that over to your alt. Either that or allow us to move Valor Stones around. The issue with allows us to move Valor Stones around is then the correct way to get Valor Stones is to play a lot of characters and send them all to your main, which is not healthy. So I think this would be a healthier way to do it.
Yeah, that's true. They got to be really careful with stuff like that in the warband economy. They can never make the answer be to just like play more characters than you really want to funnel stuff to one or two. And there's going to be edge cases, but that is something to avoid. I think the only thing the problem that I see with the suggestion of like upgrading the warbound gear without binding it and then moving it over is, I think that crosses a line that the dev team has been unwilling to cross, where you're at that point really granting direct, like relevant power from one character to another because of the crest system, right? So like, if you're upgrading it, then like the crests that you're using on that character or don't need to use because you've graduated out of those crests, you're effectively like transferring them to the alt. And just philosophically, that seems like a thing that they've been unwilling. That's sort of where the line is drawn, because it's too much like just handing the power off to a different character. They want your alt to still exist as an entity and to like have its own gearing path and own adventure, so to speak. So I think that would be awesome, but I think they won't do it because of that reason. And it kind of makes sense. Like it makes sense. Crests are really sort of the floor, right? Like that's the thing that you really earn to reach these different item level thresholds and plateaus. That is sort of your individual tune's path through the season gearing. So I mean, I think the Warbound gear has a lot of potential, and there's all kinds of stuff I'd love to see them do with it. So we'll see where else they take it. It would be awesome if they would make stuff that just never bound, and maybe it was like a little lower in terms of its overall, ceiling, but you could just take it off, put it in the bank, and some other tune could grab it and go use it for as long as they needed it.
Some of my legacy stuff is that. Some of the I literally was on a character who I've played since my day one character from World of Warcraft ages ago. And some of the legacy gear that character just had saved up in the bank is Warbound, not till equipped, not anything. It's just Warbound. I can just mail it around to whoever wants to use it. Now, I don't know how viable and useful it would be item level wise, because it's like item level 49 or 87 or something like that, right? But it's one of those cases where you're like, all right, like that is something that exists in the game already. And yeah, I'm with you that it might be neat to have that. I feel like heirlooms should really fill out that gap, though. I feel like heirlooms would be the thing that they just need to invest some more time in to make them relevant and be relevant at higher levels, rather than be a situation where we're essentially using Warbound gear all of the time and having to like bank up this huge thing of Warbound gear when we already have an heirloom tab with all the heirlooms in it that you can spawn in for your character.
And all the heirlooms are pretty deprecated at this point. They're so much lower item level than quest rewards would be. So they do need some help. But there was some stuff from like, I mean, like to what you're just saying, like from archaeology that it actually is just like Warbound now. Like it got converted and it has the Warbound tag on it. Which like, I'm not saying please give us new Warbound items via archaeology. Okay. That's I don't really want that specifically, but like, yeah, I mean, there is precedent for that kind of item, right? That you get on one character and you can use it on that character or transfer to another and so on. So yeah, I mean, I think there's just unexplored potential there for sure. So I would like to see more stuff come in to support it, but we'll see how far they're willing to take it in terms of that power transference.
Get everyone back out there farming their ghost moose. All right. The 20th anniversary PTR is up and live, and they're doing things with it. The things I'll highlight from this week is that you can now queue for the new 10 to 20 player scenario where you're helping Chromie knock some unintended guests from her tour of the opening of the gates of Anchorage. So if that's something you want to participate in, you can go and do that. The Shaw of Anger is there and gate crashing along with Archivon the Stonewatcher, so that's available now. And basically, as you get farther down that, we start to get into like Drakthir racial updates. The tail swipe is no longer a racial for Drakthir. Tail swipe is now learned baseline for evokers because you have a tail. So yeah, it's just a baseline thing.
Well, like this was the thing that they were gonna have. Every Drakthir would have it, but it had like there was like a longer cooldown if you weren't an evoker, and then evokers had like some built-in talents or something that would. So they just said, you know what? Actually, we don't like that. Yeah. Let's just get rid of it for the other classes, and it'll just be the way that it was for evokers, and we'll just make it, a baseline thing instead of a racial.
We also saw changes to Restoration Druid, Devastation Evoker, Hunters for survival spec, mages with with arcane and frostfire and fire specs, Mistweaver monks, holy paladins, protection paladins, assassination outlaw and subtlety rogues, elemental shamans and enhancement shamans, and the warlock diabolist hero talent stuff got some changes too. So again, check out show notes if you're looking for those particular changes and what's happening with your class. This is months out, so there's going to be more changes and more things to talk about as we get there. But yep, those are big things to check out. They also made the Warband Bank deposit now has a deposit all Warbound items button, and this will also deposit the refundable items. So if you're someone who just like went to a vendor and bought up some gear and you're trying to throw it into your Warbound bank and you just want to hit deposit all Warbound items as opposed to finding it in your bag, it will now go in there as opposed to being like, no, it's going to sit in your bag because it's still a refundable item. So that's one of the other fixes they put in for that. So keep that in mind. They've also adjusted the map icons for better visibility for Flight Master, teleporters, meta quests, and repeatable quests. So those should be a little bit more obvious once this all comes out. Yeah, man. Overall, massive show, huge amount of things to cover. Glad we covered what we could. And with that, I want to take a moment to thank our patrons. They contribute a ton to our show and help us improve on the content we create, help us keep on track, and help these shows happening every week. Today, I'm giving a special shout out to Alianas, Arajian, Bradley, Dustin, James, Kapowie, Max, Saucemaster 6000, Shorel, and Rager. Thank you so much for all that you contribute to the show, as well as all of our patrons, past and present. We appreciate all of you. You all help us keep this show on track, help us raise up those numbers of people who are watching, help us do every episode every week, pay all the bills that are associated with that. There's some talks of some things that we're going to be doing for the show soon, which is pretty exciting. And everyone will get to experience that soon, hopefully. So thank you, patrons. You all are amazing.
Absolutely. Yes, patrons, thank you so much for all you have contributed to the show, past and present. It helps us out tremendously. It's kept us going all these years and helps us, continue to grow the show and keep all the stuff we've done online and accessible to you. We couldn't do it without you, so thank you so much. And we got so many new patrons on board in the last few weeks, since expansion and everything, and we really appreciate it and glad we could be along for the ride with you as you take these steps into War Within.
Yeah. Another great way to support the show is by leaving us those 5-star reviews. They really help out our show and move up those charts. So you head over to your iTunes, your Apple Podcasts, or even I think your Spotify, and you can leave us some reviews. I don't think you can write one on Spotify, but you can at least leave a 5-star. This one comes in from Matt MCCX from the US, entitled Great Podcast. Love listening to this while I'm out on a walk or driving. These dudes do a good job covering all the relevant content from a casual to a more dedicated perspective. Thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate you writing in that review. It helps us find more viewership. It helps us move up those charts. And we've been floating around that top 10 podcasts for video games in the US for the past chunk of weeks. And it's just been wonderful to see us sort of doing so well as a show and so many people enjoying it. So thank you for leaving us that review and helping us out.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much, Matt, for writing in. Great to hear from you and glad we could accompany you as you're, doing stuff that you have to do and you can't play WoW during it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like those are always frustrating times, especially when we got an expansion like War Within that's still fresh.
Yep.
I find myself like not wanting to log off at the end of the night, or like then I'm trying to fall asleep and I'm thinking about the stuff I want to do in the game, or
Yep.
like I'm waking up in the morning and I'm going, okay, what do I have to get done before I can sit down and play? It's a good feeling, but it is complicated. But yeah, so glad we could maybe fill in some of those gaps for you. Great to hear from you, and thanks for writing in. And yeah, I mean, the support of the show has been so great around this whole launch window, and reviews, 5 stars, all that stuff helps us out tremendously with discoverability. It helps new people find us, and then we sometimes when new people find the show, then they start hanging around the Discord and we make some new friends and people maybe find some new people to play with or whatever. And that's what really makes the whole MMORPG engine kind of keep rolling,
Yeah.
So thank you for writing in, and thank you to everybody. I mean, we still got some reviews banked up. We kind of just do one a week, and we got a whole bunch in August and into September. So we're getting there, but we do have a backlog. So
Excellent.
If you wrote in, we'll get to you. But yeah, thank you everybody who's been taking the time to do that.
Yeah, please continue writing in. I like having reviews every week. It is a wonderful thing. And if we get to the point where we're like, man, we have so many reviews, we can do 2 a week. We'll do 2 a week. That's great. I love doing that. So I just like having them on each episode. So thank you so much, Matt. Again, that's going to wrap up episode 649 of The Starting Zone. If you want to check out show notes for this episode or leave us a comment on the show, you can head on over to thestartingzone.com, the official website for the Starting Zone podcast. If you want to contact the show and leave us your feedback or ask a question, you can email us at thestartingzone@gmail.com or reach out to us on Twitter at The Starting Zone, or you can join our Discord server, thestartingzone.com/Discord. We'll get you to the page where you click the button and you join the Discord server. If you want to get your hands on some TSE gear, you can find that over at TeePublic. That's teepublic.com/stores/The Starting Zone, and check out all the designs on shirts and mugs and stickers and that kind of stuff. And Jason, where can folks find you on the internet?
Best place to find me, as always, is over on Twitter. You can find me over there at Shieldwald. You can also find me over on Blue Sky. The username is just JLucas over there, so come say hi. And you can also find me streaming WoW on twitch.tv/Shieldwald and youtube.com/Shieldwald. This is the last week, I believe, for Twitch drops. So if you still need your ghastly charger, stop on by. I'll be streaming Tuesday, Wednesday, and Sunday, 7:30 Eastern for raid nights. And I think you have until like Wednesday or something on the drops. So stop by Tuesday or Wednesday and watch some WoW streams if you want a free horse. And support a streamer still going on. So 2 gifted subs on any WoW channel. You get a free pet, which, well, it's not free, but you get the pet and 2 other people get subs, which is a nice system. So you can get those from my channel as well if you want your Huntress Sentinel pet, the green ghost-looking owl thing. It's pretty cool. So that is only on Twitch, but YouTube also I've been co-streaming too, so you can hang out there if you prefer. So come say hi. We'll be doing, I think Tuesday will be pretty chill, Nerebar Palace normal reclear. So, and then we'll be taking our first little baby steps into Season 1 Keystones. So come check it out.
All right. For me, if you're trying to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Spencer_Downey or over on Twitch at twitch.tv/SpencerHD. I also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/@SpencerHD. I haven't produced content for them in a little bit. I was tempted to stream this week. However, my anxiety over getting back into raiding and being back in that role won out over trying to add the anxiety of also streaming at the same time while I'm doing it. So next week is what I'm probably looking at for that. We'll kick it off with Mythic stuff next Sunday. And I'll feel more confident going into that with having a stream going at the same time as me playing the game. So hopefully people swing on by and enjoy that. Those will be 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. on Sundays and Mondays for that raid team. And yeah, I don't know, maybe I'll stream some Mythic Plus. Maybe I'll hop in with Jason as Mythic Plus. Who knows? We'll see what happens. Anyways, with that, for Jason and myself, we want to say thanks for listening and jobs done.